Just 5 days after I buried my husband, my sister stood in her suburban backyard, clinked her champagne glass, and announced to our entire family that her 1-year-old son was actually my dead husband's child. As my parents nodded in solemn agreement, she slapped a forged will onto the patio table, demanding half of my $986,000 home as her son's rightful inheritance. I stared at the poorly typed document, looked up at her smug face, and said, "Oh, I see. Good luck with that." What she did not know was that I was barely holding back my laughter because of a medical secret my husband and I had kept for years. My name is Gemma, 33 years old, and before I tell you how I systematically dismantled my family's lives and sent my sister to jail, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to crush a toxic family member with cold hard facts. The drive to my nephew Leo's first birthday party felt like a literal death march. It had been exactly 5 days since I stood in a freezing graveyard and watched the love of my life being lowered into the ground. My husband Liam was only 34 years old when a massive heart attack took him from me without a single warning. We had been building a beautiful, quiet life together in Seattle for the past 8 years. I was working hard as a digital marketing director, and he was my absolute rock, the only person who truly understood me and protected me from the constant chaos of my relatives. Now my eyes were so swollen from crying that I could barely see the road ahead of me. The passenger seat of my car was painfully empty, holding only a brightly wrapped birthday gift, instead of the man who was supposed to be sitting there holding my hand. Anyone with a shred of basic human empathy would have told a newly widowed woman to stay home and grieve in peace. But my family did not do empathy. They did obligations. My mother Diane had called me the very morning after Liam's funeral to remind me that Leo's birthday was a milestone event that required full attendance. She actually told me that I needed to stop wallowing and show up because family requires sacrifice. That phrase was her favorite weapon against me. I pulled into the pristine suburban neighborhood where my sister Brittany lived. Brittany was 30 years old, a self-proclaimed lifestyle vlogger who spent her days staging perfect photos for social media while drowning in massive debt behind the scenes. Growing up, Brittany was the undisputed golden child of our family. My parents, Thomas and Diane, were textbook country club snobs who cared far more about keeping up appearances than raising decent human beings. They absolutely adored Brittany because she played the part of the beautiful, popular daughter perfectly. If Brittany maxed out her credit cards buying designer handbags, my parents would quietly pay off the balance without a second thought. If Brittany wrecked her car, my father would buy her a brand new one by the end of the week. I, on the other hand, was always expected to figure everything out on my own. I paid my own way through college, built my own career from the ground up, and bought my own house. My independence was never celebrated or praised. It was just a convenient excuse for my parents to focus all their financial and emotional resources entirely on Brittany. The only redeeming quality about Brittany's household was her husband, Terrence. Terrence is 32 years old, an incredibly talented architect, and genuinely one of the kindest men I have ever met. As an African-American man working his way up in a highly competitive corporate firm, Terrence routinely put in 60-hour work weeks just to support Brittany's lavish aesthetic and constant demands for luxury. He loved her blindly and provided a beautiful life for their son Leo. Terrence was always warm and welcoming to Liam and me, often stepping away from the superficial family gossip to talk with us about real things like art travel and his architectural designs. It always broke my heart to see how Brittany manipulated him constantly, demanding more money for home renovations and expensive vacations while contributing absolutely nothing to the household but her internet drama and complaints. I parked my car and walked slowly toward the backyard gate. The sound of cheerful pop music and clinking glasses made my stomach turn. I took a deep breath, plastered a fake smile on my face, and stepped into the party. The moment I walked through the wooden gate, the conversation in my immediate vicinity stopped dead. My mother and father were standing near the extravagant catering table. They looked at me, took in my pale face and simple black dress, and offered nothing but cold, judgmental stares. There was no comforting hug, no quiet question about how I was holding up after the worst week of my life. My mother simply frowned at my outfit, clearly displeased that I was bringing the mood down with my visible grief. She always hated when the attention was not centered entirely on her or her favorite child. Brittany was across the yard posing for carefully curated pictures with baby Leo. She spotted me, whispered something to her group of friends, and smiled a smile that did not reach her eyes. Terrence waved warmly from the grill, completely unaware of the dark storm his wife was about to unleash on all of us. I walked forward, gripping the gift box tightly, bracing myself for the usual passive-aggressive comments about my life choices. The air felt heavy, suffocating even in the bright afternoon sun. But I had no idea that my family was about to cross a line so unforgivable that it would permanently destroy our entire world, starting with the very next sentence out of my sister's mouth. Brittany picked up a silver spoon and tapped it lightly against her crystal champagne flute. The sharp, high-pitched sound cut through the upbeat party music, signaling everyone to quiet down. People turned their attention toward the center of the patio where she stood holding baby Leo on her hip. I assumed she was going to make a standard birthday toast. Maybe she would even offer a brief, obligatory moment of silence for my late husband to keep up her perfect, compassionate influencer image. Instead, her face twisted into a mask of pure manufactured sorrow. She let out a dramatic, trembling sigh and wiped a non-existent tear from her perfectly powdered cheek. "I have a confession to make," Brittany projected her voice so every single guest in the backyard could hear her clearly. "This past year has been incredibly difficult. We have all been carrying heavy burdens, but none heavier than the secret I have been forced to keep to protect my family." I felt my stomach tighten. Terrence stepped closer to her, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. He reached out to support her, clearly thinking she was about to talk about her struggles with postpartum depression or financial stress. But Brittany stepped away from his touch. She looked directly at me, her eyes locking onto mine with a cold, predatory gleam. "Liam's death has forced me to finally speak the truth," she continued, her voice wavering in a flawless performance. "I cannot let his legacy be forgotten. I cannot let his only child grow up without knowing who his real father was." She took a deep breath and delivered the final fatal blow. "Terrence is not Leo's biological father. Liam is." The entire backyard went completely dead silent. The sound of shattering glass suddenly and violently broke the silence. Terrence had dropped his beer bottle. It smashed against the concrete patio, sending amber liquid and green shards flying in every direction. He stood completely frozen, his face draining of all color. He stared at his wife, his mouth opening and closing, as he tried to process the sheer magnitude of the betrayal she had just spoken into existence. The guests gasped. Some covered their mouths in horror. Everyone else immediately turned to stare at me. My brain short-circuited. My husband of 8 years, the man I had just buried, the man who held my hand through every storm, was being accused of fathering my sister's child. Before I could even formulate a single word of protest, Brittany reached into her designer diaper bag and pulled out a crisp, folded piece of paper. She held it up like a trophy. "I know this is shocking," Brittany said, elevating her volume over the rising murmurs of the crowd. "But Liam knew the truth. We had a brief, regrettable lapse in judgment 2 years ago. When he found out I was pregnant, he promised he would make things right. He promised his son would be taken care of." She waved the paper in the air. "He gave me this updated will just 3 months ago. He wanted to make sure Leo received his rightful inheritance. The will clearly states that half of the house Liam and Gemma shared, the house, currently valued at $986,000, belongs to Leo." My parents did not gasp. They did not look shocked. In fact, my mother Diane and my father Thomas immediately stepped forward, moving to stand on either side of Brittany like a pair of loyal bodyguards. They already knew. They had planned this with her. "Gemma," You need to be reasonable about this, my father said, using his stern, authoritative country club voice. We know you are grieving, but you cannot let your personal feelings punish an innocent child. My mother chimed in, her tone dripping with toxic condescension. You have a massive empty house now, Gemma. It is simply too much space for a childless widow. You need to stop being selfish. Brittany is struggling to raise Liam's flesh and blood. The right thing to do is to sell the property, divide the assets, and make room for your husband's only legacy. They stood there completely united, fully expecting me to collapse onto the grass. They anticipated a hysterical breakdown. They wanted me to scream, to cry, to beg for mercy, proving to the entire neighborhood that I was an unstable emotional wreck who needed them to take control of my assets. They wanted me to feel so humiliated by the idea of my dead husband's infidelity that I would simply hand over the keys to make the shame disappear. They thought I would surrender my home, my sanctuary, and my financial security just to keep the peace and avoid a public scandal. My mother even had the audacity to place a comforting hand on Brittany's shoulder, validating this grotesque theater, while her actual son-in-law stood nearby, a shattered shell of a man. But I did not break down. The initial shock evaporated instantly, replaced by an absolute freezing clarity. I walked slowly toward Brittany, my heels clicking deliberately against the paving stones. The guests parted like the Red Sea, giving me a wide berth. I stopped right in front of her, ignoring the defensive posture my parents took. I held out my hand. "Let me see that document," I commanded. Brittany smirked, clearly believing she had won. She handed me the paper with a triumphant little nod. I unfolded it and stared at the typed words. It took me exactly 3 seconds to identify the glaring flaws. The legal jargon was absolute garbage, clearly copied and pasted from a free internet template. The formatting was completely inconsistent, but the most damning evidence was the signature at the very bottom. The looping letters were a clumsy, amateurish attempt at replicating Liam's handwriting. The slant was entirely wrong, and the pressure marks indicated someone had drawn it slowly, carefully tracing a reference rather than signing it fluidly. But the forged signature was not the real reason I felt a sudden, overpowering urge to laugh out loud. The real reason was a deeply guarded medical secret that Liam and I had shared since the very first year of our marriage. A definitive biological truth that made Brittany's entire performance not just a lie, but a physical impossibility. I looked up from the fraudulent piece of paper. I looked at my mother's self-righteous glare, my father's greedy anticipation, and my sister's arrogant smirk. Then I looked at Terrence, who was literally trembling, a broken man waiting for his entire world to collapse. I calmly folded the paper in half and handed it back to Brittany. I let a slow, icy smirk spread across my face. I looked my sister dead in the eyes and delivered my response with perfect, unshakable composure. "Oh, I see," I said softly, making sure the words carried just far enough for my parents to hear. "Good luck with that." I did not wait for their reaction. I simply turned around and began walking back toward the wooden gate. I did not run. I did not look back. I marched away with my head held high, my posture projecting nothing but absolute dominance. As I reached the sidewalk, the stunning silence of the backyard finally shattered. I heard Terrence let out a loud, agonizing scream, demanding Brittany tell him the truth. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove away from the chaos, knowing full well that I was about to unleash a legal hellfire that would leave my toxic family with absolutely nothing. The heavy exhaustion of the previous day had finally dragged me into a deep, dreamless sleep. But my brief escape from reality was violently interrupted just before 8 in the morning. A loud, grinding mechanical noise echoed through my bedroom window, accompanied by the distinct heavy rumble of a commercial diesel engine idling right outside my house. I sat up in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. For a split second, my sleep-addled brain thought it might be construction workers on the street. Then I heard the sharp, unmistakable sound of a power drill grinding directly against metal. Someone was at my front door. I threw off the heavy duvet, grabbed my robe, and hurried to the large bay window overlooking my front yard. I pulled back the curtain just an inch and stared down at a scene so incredibly brazen that it actually made me freeze in my tracks. A massive rented moving truck was parked illegally across my pristine driveway, crushing the edge of my manicured flower beds. Standing on my front porch directing a man in a work uniform with a heavy-duty drill was my sister Brittany. She was wearing designer sunglasses and holding a coffee cup, looking like she was supervising a home renovation rather than committing a home invasion. Flanking her on either side like loyal soldiers reporting for duty were my parents. My father Thomas was pointing at the doorframe, instructing the hired locksmith on exactly how to remove my deadbolt. My mother Diane stood a few feet away on the front walkway, clutching a clipboard stuffed with paperwork, and occasionally nodding her head in vigorous approval. They had not even waited 24 hours after dropping their nuclear lie at the birthday party. They were quite literally trying to break into my house and seize my property while I was sleeping. A surge of cold, calculated adrenaline flushed every ounce of sleep from my system. I did not panic. I did not scream. I walked down the staircase with measured, deliberate steps. I reached the entryway just as the drill bit pierced through the brass casing of my deadbolt, sending a spray of metal shavings onto my hardwood floor. I reached out, grabbed the handle, and yanked the heavy front door open entirely. The locksmith jumped backward, dropping his drill in sheer surprise. Brittany spilled a splash of her overpriced latte onto her expensive sneakers. My father stumbled forward, having been leaning against the doorframe for leverage. I stood in the threshold, my arms crossed, staring them down with absolutely zero emotion on my face. "What exactly do you think you are doing?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft and perfectly calm. Brittany recovered her composure instantly. She pushed her sunglasses up onto the top of her head and offered me a condescending, sickly, sweet smile. "We are moving in, Gemma. I told you yesterday half of this house legally belongs to Leo now. As his mother and primary guardian, I am simply taking possession of his rightful assets to make sure you do not try to sell the property or damage his inheritance out of spite." My father puffed out his chest, attempting to intimidate me with his physical presence. "We brought the locksmith because you were not answering the doorbell, Gemma. You need to step aside and let your sister bring her things inside. We are moving her in today to secure the premises. It is the only sensible thing to do until the estate is formally divided. You brought a moving truck and a drill to my house at 8 in the morning, based on a fraudulent piece of paper," I said, looking directly at the locksmith. "I highly advise you to pack up your tools and step off my property before you become an accessory to breaking and entering." The locksmith looked nervously between my father and me. "Listen, lady, they showed me a piece of paper saying they had legal rights to the property." "I did not show you a deed," I countered smoothly. "I did not show you a court order. They showed you a fake will that has not seen the inside of a probate court. If you drill 1 more millimeter into my door, I am having you arrested." The man grabbed his tool bag and practically ran toward his van, completely ignoring my father's angry demands to stay and finish the job he was paid for. As the locksmith sped away, Brittany's face contorted with genuine rage. She stepped up to the porch step, invading my personal space. "You cannot keep me out of my own house," she sneered. "Liam wanted his son to live here. You are just a bitter, barren widow who cannot handle the fact that my husband chose me over you to carry his legacy. We are moving my things into the master bedroom today, and there is absolutely nothing you can do to stop it." I did not flinch. I did not take a single step backward. "You are trespassing, Brittany," I said, keeping my tone completely even. "And you have exactly 2 minutes to get that obnoxious truck off my crushed hydrangeas before I call the police and have you all removed in handcuffs." I pressed the green call button on my screen, lifted the device to my ear, and calmly requested immediate police assistance for a hostile trespassing in progress at my address. I did not raise my voice. I did not show a single ounce of panic. I clearly stated to the dispatcher that 3 individuals had brought a commercial moving vehicle onto my property and had literally attempted to drill through my front door locks. My mother heard my calm delivery and wailed even louder, clutching the side of the truck as if her legs could no longer support her immense fabricated grief. My father glared at me, his face turning a deep shade of crimson, completely infuriated that his intimidation tactics had failed to break my resolve. The 10 minutes it took for the patrol cars to arrive felt like an absurd stage play. Brittany leaned against the side of the moving truck, arms crossed, sipping her coffee with a deeply arrogant expression. She genuinely believed her ambush was flawless. She assumed the police would take one look at a weeping mother and a confident patriarch and immediately force me to hand over my keys. When two black and white squad cars finally pulled up to the curb with their lights flashing, my father immediately stepped away from the doorframe and walked down the driveway. He shifted instantly into his most polished, authoritative country club persona. He approached the two uniformed officers with an easy, practiced smile, holding his hands open to show he was a reasonable man dealing with an unreasonable situation. "Officers, I am so sorry you had to be called out here for this," my father said, using a tone dripping with manufactured patience. "This is simply a tragic family misunderstanding. My daughter Gemma, the one standing on the porch, recently lost her husband. She is grieving heavily and is not thinking quite clearly right now. My other daughter Brittany is simply here to secure the property for her infant son, who is the deceased husband's rightful heir. We have all the legal documentation right here." My father proudly pulled the forged will from his jacket pocket and waved it toward the officers like it was a golden ticket. He expected them to nod, pat him on the back, and instruct me to stand aside. The older of the two officers took the folded paper, scanned it briefly, and then walked up my front steps to hear my side of the story. I did not match my father's frantic energy. I stood tall, pulled my robe tighter around my shoulders, and looked the officer dead in the eye. "Officer, that piece of paper has never seen the inside of a courtroom," I stated firmly. "It is a fraudulent document, completely devoid of any probate authentication. Furthermore, the man they are claiming owned this house actually had absolutely zero legal equity in this property." As I spoke those words, a vivid memory of my late husband flashed through my mind. 2 years ago, when we were finalizing the purchase of this beautiful home, Liam had sat me down at our kitchen table with a stack of legal documents. He was a deeply observant man who had recognized the toxic, parasitic nature of my parents and my sister long before I fully accepted it myself. "Gemma, your family members are absolute gold diggers." Liam had told me, his expression entirely serious. "They view you as a resource, not a daughter. We have to bulletproof your assets. We are putting this entire property under a limited liability company that you solely control. They will try to take everything you have if they ever get the chance, and I will not let them ruin your future." Liam's brilliant foresight was currently standing as an impenetrable fortress between me and the vultures trying to pick my bones clean. I turned back into the house for a brief moment, retrieved a thick manila envelope from my entryway console table, and handed it directly to the police officer. "Here is the actual property deed along with the corporate registration," I explained smoothly. "This house is fully owned by a private LLC. I am the sole managing member of that LLC. Liam's name is nowhere on the title. Therefore, even if that ridiculous will were real, which it is not, my sister cannot inherit an asset that my husband never legally owned." The officer reviewed my official notarized documents. He looked at the corporate seals, read my name printed clearly on the managing member line, and handed the paperwork back to me with a respectful nod. He turned his attention back to my father, and the country club charm completely evaporated from my father's face. "Sir, this is a civil matter," the officer announced loudly so Brittany and my mother could hear. "This unprobated will does not grant you or your daughter any right to occupy this premise. The woman on the porch is the verified legal owner. You need to pack up this moving truck and leave the property immediately, or I will have all of you arrested for criminal trespassing." My mother instantly stopped fake crying. The loud theatrical sobs cut off so abruptly it was almost comical. She stared at the officer in pure shock, realizing her performance had failed spectacularly. My father's face twisted in rage. He opened his mouth to argue, but the second officer stepped forward, resting a hand on his utility belt. "I highly suggest you listen to my partner and move the vehicle," the second officer warned. Brittany's arrogant posture shattered. Her eyes darted wildly between the police officers, my solid proof of ownership, and my unflinching gaze. She realized she could not bully her way through my front door today. Furious, she stomped across the crushed hydrangeas and yanked the driver's side door of the moving truck open. But before she climbed into the cab, she turned back to face me. The mask of the grieving mother was completely gone, replaced by a sneer of pure, unadulterated malice. "You think you won today?" Gemma Brittany shouted over the idling engine of the truck. "You think keeping this house makes you untouchable? You might want to go back inside and check your bank accounts right now. You have absolutely no idea what I have already done to you." She slammed the heavy truck door shut, and the vehicle lurched forward, speeding away from my curb and leaving my parents scrambling to get into their own car to follow. I watched them retreat down the street, my pulse steady and my mind racing. I thanked the officers for their time, walked back inside my quiet house, and locked the ruined door. Brittany's threat echoed in my ears. I walked straight to my home office and opened my laptop, ready to uncover exactly what kind of financial warfare my sister had unleashed. And that was the exact moment my mother decided to activate her ultimate weapon. Diane saw several of my neighbors stepping out onto their porches, drawn by the commotion and the sound of the drill. Mrs. Gable from next door was watering her plants, openly staring at our standoff. Realizing they had an audience, my mother immediately burst into loud theatrical tears. She collapsed dramatically against the side of the moving truck, clutching her chest and wailing loudly enough for the entire street to hear. "Oh, my poor Gemma," my mother cried out, her voice echoing through the quiet suburban neighborhood. "The grief has completely shattered her mind. She has gone completely insane." My father rushed to her side, playing the role of the supportive, heartbroken patriarch perfectly. Diane continued her performance, turning her tear-stained face toward Mrs. Gable and the other watching neighbors. "She is trying to throw a fatherless baby out onto the streets." My mother sobbed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Liam's own flesh and blood, a poor innocent child, and she is denying him the roof over his head just because she is blinded by jealousy. We are just trying to help her accept reality, but the grief has made her so cruel." Brittany immediately joined in, burying her face in her hands and letting out a loud, pathetic whimper. "I just want my son to have the life his father wanted for him," she cried, looking pleadingly at the audience of neighbors. "Why is she doing this to us? Why is she punishing my baby?" I stood on my porch, watching my own flesh and blood put on an award-winning theatrical performance designed entirely to paint me as a deranged, vindictive villain. They were banking on public shame to force me into compliance. They truly believed that if they made enough noise and created enough social pressure, I would crumble, step aside, and surrender the keys to my kingdom just to stop the embarrassment. I looked at the three of them, a trio of absolute parasites attempting to feast on my tragedy. I reached into the pocket of my robe, pulled out my cell phone, and dialed 911. I sat down in my ergonomic leather chair, the material cool against my skin, and flipped open my laptop. My fingers flew across the keyboard, typing the master password to the joint financial portal Liam and I had shared for almost a decade. I bypassed the corporate accounts, which I knew were legally insulated under my limited liability company, and clicked directly into our primary checking and savings dashboards. The screen loaded for a fraction of a second before flashing a bright red error banner across the top of the interface. The words "account frozen" were stamped over every single joint asset we owned. My primary checking account, which held the liquid funds I desperately needed for Liam's final funeral expenses and the upcoming monthly mortgage payment, displayed a terrifying available balance of exactly $0. I immediately picked up my phone and bypassed the automated customer service system to reach my private banking liaison. After a grueling, intense 15-minute hold, the representative delivered the crushing blow in a highly apologetic but firm tone. An emergency legal injunction had been filed against my accounts at exactly 9 o'clock the previous night. My sister had not just been making idle threats on my front lawn. She had executed a calculated preemptive strike while I was distracted by my grief. Brittany had somehow found a cheap, highly unethical probate attorney who operated out of a strip mall and was completely willing to file aggressive motions without verifying a single piece of evidence. This bottom-feeding lawyer had taken the fraudulent forged will and immediately petitioned a midnight on-call judge for an emergency asset freeze. The legal filing absurdly claimed that I was a severe flight risk. My sister had actually sworn under penalty of perjury that I was actively attempting to liquidate my deceased husband's accounts to flee the state, intentionally hiding a minor's rightful inheritance to fund my escape. Because of the serious nature of the allegations involving a child, the bank had absolutely no choice but to comply with the temporary injunction until a formal hearing could be scheduled. They had successfully cut off my immediate cash flow, weaponizing the legal system to starve me out. It was a classic brutal siege tactic. If I had been an ordinary grieving widow, this would have been the exact moment I broke. Without access to liquid capital to hire a defense attorney or pay basic utility bills, most women would have been forced to negotiate with their attackers just to survive the month. But Brittany had severely underestimated the depth of my financial contingency plans. Before I could even begin routing emergency operating funds from my isolated business accounts to bypass her blockade, my phone vibrated aggressively against the mahogany surface of my desk. It was not a text message from a friend checking in to offer condolences. It was a massive, unending cascade of social media notifications. They were pouring into my device so fast that the screen blurred into a continuous glowing stream of alerts. Instagram tags, Twitter, mentions Facebook messages, and an endless flood of TikTok shares. I clicked the top notification and was instantly redirected to Brittany's primary social media profile. Staring back at me from the screen was my sister's face, heavily filtered to look pale, exhausted, and totally heartbroken. The video was an absolute masterclass in digital emotional manipulation. It was set to a slow, melancholic piano track designed to immediately trigger sympathy. Brittany was sitting in Leo's dimly lit nursery, rocking her baby while staring mournfully into the camera lens. Her eyes were red and brimming with perfectly timed tears that rolled slowly down her cheeks. "I never thought I would have to make a video like this," Brittany whispered to her millions of devoted followers, her voice trembling with practiced vulnerability. "But my family is being completely destroyed by greed. The man I loved, the biological father of my sweet child, just passed away unexpectedly. Before he died, he promised our baby would be taken care of. He left a legal will to make sure his son would not end up on the streets. But his wealthy widow, my own sister, has decided that money is more important than a fatherless infant." The video then suddenly cut to a highly edited, completely out of context audio clip of my own voice. It was a hidden recording from the previous day at the birthday party. The audio simply featured me saying the words, "Oh, I see. Good luck with that," in my cold, dismissive tone. Brittany had strategically cropped out the entire confrontation, erasing the fake will and her insane demands, making it sound like I was sneering at the very existence of a starving child, rather than reacting to a poorly forged document. She went on to claim that I was using my corporate wealth to crush her, that I had violently locked her out of her son's rightful home, and that I was hoarding millions of dollars while she struggled to buy basic baby formula. It was a complete malicious fabrication, from start to finish meticulously designed to enrage the internet. And it was working flawlessly. I glanced at the engagement statistics below the video player. It had only been live for 3 hours, yet it had already amassed over 4 million views. The comment section was a terrifying, rapidly expanding echo chamber of digital mob justice. Thousands of strangers were violently demanding my immediate cancellation. People were publicly sharing my full name, the name of my digital marketing agency, and even speculating on my private home address. They called me an evil, greedy monster. They rallied behind Brittany, pledging massive financial donations to her newly linked crowdfunding campaign and promising to ruin my professional reputation permanently. Brittany truly thought she had checkmated me. She believed that freezing my bank accounts and turning the entire internet into her personal weaponized army would force me to surrender my home and my dignity. She wanted me terrified, broke, and publicly humiliated on a global scale. I watched the view count on her video tick higher and higher, the numbers spinning wildly out of control as the algorithm pushed her lies to millions more screens. I calmly closed the application and set my phone face down on the desk. The sheer audacity of her public defamation extinguished any remaining shred of sisterly mercy I might have still harbored. She had decided to turn a private family betrayal into a global digital spectacle. I took a deep breath, opened a secure encrypted browser, and decided it was exactly the right time to deploy the ultimate counterstrike. The moment my secure browser loaded, a secondary notification chimed from my desktop tower. It was not a social media alert, it was the distinct sharp ping of my secure corporate email client. Then another ping sounded. Then 10 more. Within 60 seconds, the notifications blurred into a continuous, deafening electronic wail. I clicked over to my professional inbox and watched as thousands of incoming messages completely overwhelmed our agency's localized mail server. The viral outrage my sister had carefully manufactured was no longer contained to the comment sections of TikTok and Instagram. The digital mob had found my professional profile, and they were actively launching a targeted strike against my livelihood. I opened the first few emails, watching the subject lines rapidly populate my screen. They were aggressive, unhinged, and universally demanding my immediate termination. Strangers from all over the country were emailing the general contact addresses of my digital marketing firm, threatening to launch massive boycott campaigns against our top-tier corporate clients unless the evil, greedy widow was fired by the end of the business day. They spammed the inboxes of my colleagues, my subordinates, and my agency partners. My direct phone line at the office began routing endless voicemails filled with pure, unfiltered vitriol from anonymous callers who genuinely believed they were delivering righteous justice on behalf of a starving infant. My personal cell phone buzzed. It was my agency's chief executive officer, Marcus. He had been my mentor for 6 years and knew exactly what kind of person I was. He knew about my husband's sudden death, and he knew how hard I had worked to secure my position. I answered the call fully prepared for the worst. Marcus was incredibly sympathetic, but his voice was tight with the underlying stress of managing a sudden, massive public relations crisis. He told me our main client servers were being subjected to distributed denial of service attacks by internet vigilantes. I did not let him finish his sentence before taking total control of the narrative. I told Marcus to instantly route all public-facing email addresses through our maximum security firewall, issue a generic statement that the firm was investigating the personal matter, and place me on an immediate paid administrative leave. I deliberately isolated myself from the company to protect the agency I helped build, giving myself absolute unrestricted freedom to completely destroy the people trying to ruin my life. Once the corporate crisis was temporarily contained, I disconnected my phone line, poured myself a glass of cold water, and cracked my knuckles. My sister had made a catastrophic tactical error. Brittany was a lifestyle vlogger who understood how to pick the right lighting, apply the perfect photo filter, and write a compelling caption. But she was fundamentally technologically illiterate. I, on the other hand, was a senior digital marketing director who had spent the last decade mastering the absolute depths of back-end analytics, algorithm manipulation, and digital footprint tracking. She had decided to wage an internet war against a woman who literally built internet infrastructure for a living. I opened my agency-grade analytics software and plugged the URL of Brittany's viral video directly into the tracking engine. I did not just look at the surface-level view counts. I ripped the data apart down to its bare digital bones. Within 20 minutes, the software illuminated exactly how she had managed to generate 4 million views in just 3 hours. The initial spike in engagement was entirely artificial. Brittany had purchased thousands of cheap, automated bot accounts from an overseas click farm to artificially inflate the video's metrics the exact second she uploaded it. This massive manufactured engagement tricked the social media platform's algorithm into believing the content was organically highly relevant, which then pushed it aggressively onto the screens of millions of real, easily manipulated human beings. I did not just note this discovery. I meticulously extracted the data. I logged the specific server nodes the bot traffic originated from. I ran a reverse lookup on the engagement patterns and uncovered the exact third-party digital marketplace where the transaction took place. I captured the timestamps, the routing protocols, and the undeniable mathematical proof that her viral sympathy campaign was built on a foundation of purchased digital fraud. I saved every single byte of this data into a secure, heavily encrypted cloud-based dossier. Next, I turned my attention to the foot soldiers of her operation. I deployed a specialized web scraping tool designed to comb through the hundreds of thousands of comments under her various social media posts. I filtered the search parameters to isolate any accounts associated with my parents, Thomas and Diane. They had not stayed quietly on the sidelines. They were actively participating in the digital lynching. My mother was replying to highly viewed comments, typing out extensive, emotionally manipulative paragraphs, claiming she was heartbroken by my cruelty, and begging strangers to donate to Britney's fraudulent crowdfunding link. My father was right there with her, aggressively replying to users who questioned the story, calling me a sociopath who had always been deeply jealous of my younger sister. They felt invincible behind their keyboards. They believed that because their words were scattered among millions of other comments, they were simply adding to the noise without leaving a trace. But the internet is written in permanent ink. Every time my mother typed a lie, I archived the specific permalink. Every time my father publicly defamed my character, I captured a high-resolution time-stamped screenshot verified by a digital notary service to ensure it was completely admissible in a court of law. I downloaded the raw video files, the caption histories, and even the deleted comments they thought they had successfully scrubbed from the internet to hide their most aggressive threats. I sat in my quiet, locked house for 6 straight hours, methodically building a weapon of absolute mass destruction. I created highly organized folders for cyber harassment, organized defamation, wire fraud, regarding the massive crowdfunding campaign, and tortious interference with my professional business contracts. I cataloged every single piece of evidence with terrifying precision. I did not shed a single tear. I did not feel an ounce of the overwhelming anxiety they were hoping to inflict upon me. I only felt the cold, mechanical satisfaction of a predator studying its prey. By the time the sun began to set outside my office window, my digital dossier was over 2 gigabytes large and completely flawless. Brittany and my parents had proudly handed me the exact rope I was going to use to hang them, and they had absolutely no idea that the trap was already perfectly set. I ejected the encrypted flash drive from my computer tower, slipping the silver metal casing into my blazer pocket. It was barely 7 in the morning the following day, but I was already dressed in a sharp charcoal suit, ready to pivot aggressively from digital defense to legal offense. I drove straight into downtown Seattle, navigating the dense morning traffic with absolute unwavering focus. My destination was a massive glass skyscraper housing the most feared and respected law firm in the Pacific Northwest. I bypassed the standard reception area and was escorted directly into the corner office of Veronica. Veronica is 50 years old, a ruthless, brilliant attorney who specialized in high-asset civil litigation and family law. She was the kind of lawyer who did not just win cases. She annihilated opposing counsel and left their clients financially destitute. Veronica sat behind a massive slab of polished obsidian that served as her desk. She wore a tailored crimson suit and peered over her silver-rimmed glasses as I took a seat across from her. She had been my marketing agency's primary corporate counsel for years, but today my business was entirely personal. I did not waste her time with tears or emotional storytelling. I simply placed the flash drive onto the cold surface of her desk, followed by a printed copy of the bank injunction, the fake will my sister had used, and the initial analytics reports from the viral smear campaign. I need to completely destroy my family, I stated, my voice completely devoid of hesitation. Veronica did not blink. She simply picked up the printed copy of the forged will and began to read. For 10 agonizingly silent minutes, the only sound in the massive corner office was the sharp turning of pages and the soft clicking of Veronica's mouse as she accessed the encrypted files on my flash drive. I watched her perfectly manicured fingernails tap against the wood as she reviewed the digital dossier. She scrutinized the IP logs, showing the bot farm purchases. She read through the unhinged defamatory comments my parents had posted online. She reviewed the temporary asset freeze my sister's cheap strip mall attorney had managed to push through the emergency courts. Most clients who sat in that chair were weeping messes terrified of losing their homes or their children to vindictive relatives. But Veronica knew I was different. She finished her review, leaned back in her plush leather chair, and steepled her fingers together. A slow, terrifyingly sharp smirk spread across her face. "Your sister is a complete idiot," Veronica said, her voice dripping with absolute disdain for Brittany's amateur tactics. "She thinks she has trapped you in a standard family court dispute. She thinks this is a simple civil matter over contested estate assets. She is incredibly wrong." Veronica leaned forward, tapping a heavy gold pen against the printed copy of the fake will. "This document alone is a massive liability. The forgery is laughable, but the fact that her attorney submitted it to a judge to secure an emergency injunction elevates this from a pathetic family squabble to perjury and felony fraud. But that is not even the best part, Gemma." She turned her monitor around so I could see the banking documents. She pointed to the routing details on the asset freeze paperwork. "Your primary joint accounts are held by a national bank with servers located across state lines in California and New York. When her garbage attorney filed that fraudulent injunction electronically, they did not just lie to a local judge. They used interstate communication channels to execute a financial freeze based on a completely fabricated legal document." I felt a sharp thrill of anticipation run down my spine. I knew exactly where Veronica was going with this. Furthermore, Veronica continued pulling up the data on Brittany's viral video and the linked crowdfunding campaign. "Your sister is currently soliciting donations from people across the entire country, using a narrative she knows is factually false. She is actively collecting thousands of dollars based on a deliberate, manufactured lie. She is using the internet to commit financial deception on a massive scale." Veronica paused, letting the sheer weight of the situation settle over the room. She looked at me, her eyes gleaming with the predatory excitement of a shark smelling blood in the water. "Gemma, by crossing state lines with digital banking interference and soliciting funds through fraudulent online campaigns, your sister has not just filed a messy civil lawsuit. She has officially committed federal wire fraud. The forgery is a state felony, but the wire fraud is a federal crime that carries severe mandatory prison sentences. And by actively participating in the digital smear campaign and fully supporting the use of the forged will to secure financial assets, your parents are officially co-conspirators in a federal financial crime." I absorbed the legal reality of my situation. My family had dug a grave so deep they would never see the sun again. They thought they were fighting a lonely widow. Instead, they had accidentally declared war on the federal government. "So what is our immediate move?" I asked, my voice steady and cold. Veronica smiled, a genuinely terrifying expression. "We do not stop the injunction. Not yet. We let her cheap attorney file the formal probate petition next week. We let them walk right into a courtroom and officially submit that forged document on the public record under oath. We let the crowdfunding campaign collect a little more money so the federal charges carry maximum weight. We give them exactly enough rope to hang themselves completely." She handed the flash drive back to me. "While they are busy celebrating their fake victory, I am going to make a few quiet phone calls to the State Attorney General's office and a contact I have at the FBI's Cyber and Financial Crimes Division. I will also begin drafting a massive civil suit for defamation, tortious interference, and intentional infliction of emotional distress to drain whatever legal funds they might try to scrape together for their criminal defense." I stood up from the chair, slipping the flash drive back into my pocket. The crushing weight of the past week suddenly felt infinitely lighter. I shook Veronica's hand, feeling a deep, dark sense of absolute satisfaction. My family wanted to take everything I had built. They wanted to humiliate me and leave me with nothing. Now they were going to lose their freedom, their reputations, and every single cent they had ever owned. I walked out of the massive glass building and stepped into the bright Seattle morning, knowing that the trap was officially set, armed, and waiting for my sister to take the final fatal step. Leaving the massive glass building behind me, my immediate plan was to head over to my own agency's headquarters, just a few blocks away. Since Marcus had placed me on paid administrative leave to protect the firm from the digital mob, I needed to quietly pack up a few essential hard drives and personal items from my office before the online harassment could manifest into physical trespassers. The crisp morning air felt invigorating, a stark contrast to the stifling suffocation I had endured over the last 48 hours. But as I approached the sleek marble plaza of my corporate building, the feeling of triumph abruptly vanished. Sitting on a concrete bench near the revolving doors, looking like a man who had not slept in a decade, was Terrence. I stopped in my tracks and simply observed him for a moment before he noticed me. The transformation in his appearance was genuinely shocking. Just 2 days ago at the birthday party, he had been a vibrant, handsome architect, grilling burgers and proudly watching his 1-year-old son play in the grass. Now he was physically hollowed out. He wore the exact same clothes from yesterday, heavily wrinkled and stained. His shoulders were slumped, his posture completely defeated, and his eyes were locked onto the pavement with a 1,000-yard stare. He was carrying the absolute crushing weight of a man whose entire reality had just been violently ripped away. When he finally lifted his head and saw me approaching, he stood up quickly, swaying slightly on his feet. "Gemma, please," Terrence said, his voice cracking instantly. His tone was not angry or demanding. It was a desperate, agonizing plea from a man drowning in an ocean of lies. "I have been calling your phone since yesterday. I did not know where else to go. I just need to know the truth. Please tell me the truth. Did Liam and Brittany actually sleep together? Is Leo really his son?" Looking at his devastated expression, I felt a sharp, profound pang of genuine empathy. Terrence was the collateral damage in my family's relentless pursuit of wealth. I knew exactly how hard this man worked. As an incredibly talented professional, he routinely pulled 60-hour work weeks, sacrificing his weekends and his health to support Brittany's lavish, fabricated influencer lifestyle. He paid the massive mortgage on their pristine suburban home, he funded the expensive cars, and he blindly subsidized the designer wardrobe she paraded in front of her online followers. He did everything right, and his reward was a public, humiliating execution orchestrated by his own wife. "Terrence," I said softly, stepping closer so we would not be overheard by the passing commuters. "Liam did not sleep with your wife. He despised Brittany. The will is a complete forgery, and her entire speech at that party was a manufactured lie." He stared at me, his eyes wide and bloodshot, desperately searching my face for any sign of deception. "But if that is true, why would she do this?" he asked, his voice trembling, as he ran a shaky hand over his face. "Why would she destroy our marriage in front of everyone? Why would she drag Liam's name through the mud? What possible reason could she have to risk everything we have built?" I reached into my oversized leather tote bag. Before I left Veronica's office, she had handed me a sealed envelope containing the preliminary findings from a private investigator her firm kept on retainer. I had intended to review it at home, but standing right here in front of this broken man, I knew exactly what he needed. Words were not going to fix the psychological damage Brittany had inflicted upon him. He needed cold, undeniable proof of who he was actually married to. I pulled the thick stack of paper from the envelope and handed it directly to him. "She did not do this because of love, Terrence," I explained calmly. "And she certainly did not do this to protect Leo. She did this because she is completely and utterly desperate. Look at the second page." Terrence took the heavy stack of documents with shaking hands. He flipped past the cover sheet, his eyes frantically scanning the highly detailed financial report Veronica's investigator had compiled overnight. As he read the numbers printed in stark black ink, his jaw tightened. His breathing hitched, and the remaining color completely drained from his face. "Brittany has been living a double life for a very long time." I continued, my voice steady and completely matter of fact. "While you were working 60-hour weeks to pay the household bills, she was secretly opening dozens of high-limit credit cards solely in her own name. She has currently amassed over $150,000 in unsecured consumer debt." The designer handbags, the luxury vacations she claimed were sponsored by brands, the lavish nursery renovations, all of it was financed through a massive, unsustainable mountain of hidden credit. Terrence traced his finger over the rows of delinquent accounts, his mind struggling to process the sheer volume of financial betrayal. He flipped to the next page, which contained copies of legal summons. She is currently facing imminent legal action from 4 separate creditors, I pointed out, tapping the legal notices. They are preparing to sue her, garnish whatever assets they can find, and completely destroy your family's financial standing. She was about to be exposed. The pristine influencer image she worships was weeks away from completely imploding. Then Liam died. I let the horrific reality of the situation fully settle over him before delivering the final truth. When Liam passed away, Brittany saw a sudden, desperate exit strategy. She knew my house was fully paid off and valued at nearly $1 million. If she could successfully forge a will, claim Liam was Leo's father, and force me to sell the property out of shame, she would walk away with nearly $500,000 in cash. It was never about a secret affair, Terrence. It was a calculated predatory heist to pay off her hidden debts and save herself from going to prison for financial fraud. She was willing to destroy your heart, burn my life to the ground, and publicly humiliate a dead man just to cover her own reckless tracks. Terrence closed the file folder slowly. The desperate, pleading look in his eyes was entirely gone. The man who had been shattered by a fake infidelity was suddenly replaced by a man hardened by a very real, very profound betrayal. He stared down at the concrete sidewalk for a long moment, the sounds of the busy Seattle morning fading into the background. When he finally looked back up at me, his expression was completely unreadable, a terrifyingly calm facade masking a massive internal detonation. He handed the file back to me, straightened his posture, and walked away down the busy city block without saying a single word. He finally knew the truth, and I knew with absolute certainty that Brittany's carefully constructed empire of lies was about to face a spectacular collapse from the inside out. He barely made it 10 paces down the busy Seattle sidewalk before I called out his name. The sound of my voice cut sharply through the morning traffic. Terrence froze. He stood entirely still for a few seconds before slowly turning around to face me again. He looked completely exhausted, like a man who had just survived a horrific car crash, only to realize he was still trapped inside the wreckage. I closed the distance between us, my heels clicking softly against the concrete. I knew I had already dealt him a devastating psychological blow by exposing the massive mountain of secret credit card debt. But if I was going to completely dismantle Brittany's fraudulent empire, I needed an inside man. I needed Terrence to be absolutely irrevocably cured of any lingering affection for my sister. I needed to shatter his remaining illusions into a million pieces. I am not finished, Terrence, I said, keeping my tone low and steady. The financial debt is just the foundation of her lies. I want you to think back over the last 2 years. I want you to think about all those mandatory influencer brand trips she took. Terrence furrowed his brow, confused by the sudden shift in topic. He blinked, struggling to keep up. The brand trips, he repeated softly. She goes to Los Angeles and Miami a few times a year. Her management agency books them for networking. She has to go to secure her sponsorships. I looked at him with profound pity. Terrence, there is no management agency. There are no sponsorships. I work as a senior director in the digital marketing industry. I know exactly how brand deals are structured, and I know exactly who is actually getting them. Brittany has never been sponsored by a luxury fashion house or a high-end skincare line. Her follower engagement rate is entirely artificially inflated by purchased bot accounts. No legitimate brand has ever paid for her flights, her 5-star hotel suites, or her expensive dinners. Terrence leaned back against the stone facade of my office building, his breathing becoming shallow. I watched the realization slowly wash over his face. I told him the brutal, undeniable truth. She paid for every single one of those trips herself using those hidden credit cards, I explained. She staged photographs in hotel lobbies, tagged brands that did not know she existed, and manipulated you into feeling proud of her fake success. She left you alone in Seattle for weeks at a time. She made you stay up all night changing diapers and balancing your demanding career while she played pretend on the beach. But if she was not attending corporate networking events, Terrence, what exactly was she doing in those hotel rooms? Who do you think she was meeting with? The color drained from his face entirely. The implication hung heavily in the air between us. If Brittany was willing to lie about her finances, her career, and my dead husband, then the sudden, terrifying reality of her solo vacations became sickeningly clear. She was not just a liar and a fraud. She was actively living a completely separate, deceitful life funded by the very debt that was about to destroy his family. Terrence closed his eyes, his chest heaving as he fought back a wave of physical nausea. I reached into my leather tote bag one last time. I bypassed the legal documents and pulled out a small, sterile plastic tube containing a medical-grade cotton swab. I held it out in front of me. Terrence opened his eyes and stared at the medical instrument, completely bewildered. "I want you to look me dead in the eye," I commanded quietly. He met my gaze. "Liam never touched your wife. He despised her. But more importantly, it was a biological impossibility. Liam was diagnosed with a severe medical condition in his 20s that rendered him completely and permanently sterile. That was our deeply guarded secret. We were actually planning to begin the private adoption process next year." Terrence gasped softly, the final puzzle piece locking firmly into place. "So when Brittany stood in that backyard and pointed the finger at my dead husband," I continued, my voice hardening into absolute steel, "she did not just tell a malicious lie. She made a catastrophic biological error. I know Liam is not the father of your child, but given the reality of her fake brand trips, I think we both know that you need to find out who actually is. And I know exactly how to prove it." I pressed the sterile plastic tube firmly into the palm of his hand. He looked down at it, his fingers trembling slightly. "I have a private, highly accredited laboratory on standby," I told him. "They can process a discrete DNA test and bypass the standard legal delays, but I need a viable genetic sample. I need you to go back to that house tonight. I need you to pretend that you are still the broken, confused, submissive husband she expects you to be. Wait until she is asleep. Take this swab, pull it out of the casing, and rub it firmly against the inside of Leo's cheek for 30 seconds. Put it back in the tube, seal it, and bring it directly to my lawyer's office tomorrow morning." Terrence stared at the medical swab. He was an architect. His entire professional life was dedicated to understanding structural integrity, finding the weak points in a foundation, and knowing exactly how to bring a building down safely. He was finally seeing the massive, rotting structural flaws in his own marriage. He realized that the woman he shared a bed with was not just selfish or misguided. She was an absolute monster who had used his own son as a disposable pawn in a sickening financial heist. He slowly closed his fist around the plastic tube. The trembling in his fingers completely stopped. When he looked back up at me, the devastated, heartbroken victim was entirely gone. His eyes were cold, dark, and filled with a terrifying new resolve. He gave me a single definitive nod. We had officially forged an alliance. He was going to secure the biological evidence from the inside, and I was going to burn her empire to the ground from the outside. I watched Terrence disappear into the rushing flow of downtown pedestrians, carrying the tiny plastic tube that was going to permanently detonate his marriage. A cold electric wave of momentum washed over me. I finally had an active operative on the inside. I turned around and walked the remaining 3 blocks to my marketing agency's sleek, glass-fronted corporate headquarters. My objective was simple. I needed to quietly access my executive suite, pack up my essential physical hard drives, grab a few personal items, and slip back out before any of the digital mob harassment spilled over into the physical world. I swiped my keycard at the private employee entrance, bypassed the bustling main lobby, and took the private elevator directly up to the 4th-floor executive wing. The office was functioning at its usual frantic pace, though a tense energy hung in the air thanks to the coordinated cyber attack my sister had launched against our servers. I gave a brief, reassuring nod to a few of my colleagues and slipped into my corner office, locking the heavy glass door behind me. I pulled a small cardboard box from the supply closet and began methodically unplugging my encrypted external drives. I had only been packing for about 10 minutes when the muffled rhythmic hum of the corporate workspace was violently interrupted. A loud, shrill voice echoed up through the central architectural atrium that connected the 4 floors of our building. It was a voice I had spent 33 years learning to tune out. I set down my hard drive and stepped out of my office, walking over to the glass balcony that overlooked the expansive open-concept main lobby. Down below, a chaotic scene was rapidly unfolding. My parents had somehow managed to tailgate an employee through the secure front perimeter and were now standing directly in the center of the reception area. My father, Thomas, was wearing his signature navy blazer and khaki slacks, looking completely out of place in our hyper-modern tech agency. My mother, Diane, was clutching her designer handbag like a weapon. 2 uniformed security guards were rapidly approaching them, holding their hands out in a universal gesture to stop, but my parents were completely ignoring them. "We are not leaving until we speak to the chief executive officer," my father bellowed, his booming voice echoing off the high ceilings and carrying to every single workstation in the building. Employees were standing up from their desks, peering over their monitors to witness the spectacle. "You have a monster working in this building, and the leadership of this company needs to answer for her actions." Marcus, my CEO, had just stepped out of a glass conference room on the 2nd floor. He looked down at the commotion, his brow furrowed in severe confusion. My mother spotted him, instantly recognizing his face from our company website. She pointed a trembling, perfectly manicured finger directly at him. "Are you the man in charge of this agency?" My mother shrieked, entirely abandoning her usual refined country club demeanor for pure unhinged theatrics. "You need to know exactly what kind of person you are employing. Your senior digital marketing director is morally bankrupt. Gemma is a sociopath who is actively stealing a home from an innocent fatherless baby." The security guards finally reached them, attempting to gently but firmly guide them back toward the exit doors. "Do not touch me," my father snarled, shoving one of the guards away. "We have every right to be here. The public needs to know the truth. Gemma is hiding behind this corporate fortress while her own sister cannot even afford basic baby formula. She is hoarding a $1 million estate that rightfully belongs to her dead husband's actual child." The silence in the building was absolute, save for my parents screaming. Dozens of my colleagues were staring in stunned disbelief. My mother leaned into the silence, amplifying her volume to ensure maximum humiliation. She thought she was delivering a fatal blow to my career. She genuinely believed that causing a massive public scene in front of my peers and my boss would shame me into immediate submission. "Gemma is an absolute disgrace to our family name," my mother wailed, attempting to squeeze out a few manufactured tears for the stunned audience. "She is a cruel, barren woman who is punishing a helpless infant out of pure jealousy. You must terminate her employment immediately. If you harbor a thief, your entire company is complicit in her abuse." Any normal person would have been mortified. A normal person would have hidden under their desk, paralyzed by the sheer embarrassment of having their darkest family secrets screamed across a professional lobby. But I did not feel a single ounce of shame. I felt an overwhelming dark sense of victory. My parents were so blinded by their own arrogant sense of entitlement that they did not realize they had just walked directly into the legal woodchipper I had set up for them that very morning. I leaned against the glass railing of the balcony, perfectly visible to everyone on the ground floor. My mother looked up and finally spotted me. Her eyes widened with victorious glee, thinking she had successfully flushed me out of hiding. I simply offered her a cold, empty smile. I did not yell back. I did not try to defend myself. I pulled my cell phone from my blazer pocket and dialed Veronica's direct line. Marcus, realizing exactly who these intruders were, immediately bypassed the stairs and signaled directly to the head of building security. "Call the Seattle Police Department immediately," Marcus commanded, his voice projecting absolute authority. "We have 2 hostile trespassers harassing an executive employee. Lock down the front doors so they cannot leave before the officers arrive." My father's face went completely pale. The arrogant fire in his eyes extinguished instantly. He had expected corporate HR to panic, drag me downstairs, and force me to apologize. He had not expected the CEO of a multi-million-dollar agency to instantly weaponize the police against him. He grabbed my mother's arm, suddenly desperate to escape the building, but the security guards had already moved to block the revolving glass doors. Veronica answered on the second ring. I kept my eyes locked on my terrified parents as I spoke into the receiver. Veronica, I said calmly, watching my father aggressively argue with the security guards, while my mother nervously clutched her purse. I need you to add 2 new charges to the civil suit. My parents just breached the secure lobby of my corporate headquarters. They are currently screaming defamatory statements about my dead husband and my assets to approximately 80 of my colleagues. And the best part is every single word they just said is being recorded by 12 different high-definition corporate security cameras with full audio capabilities. I could practically hear the predatory grin forming on Veronica's face through the phone line. The trap had not just snapped shut, it had completely crushed them. I ended the call, tucked my phone away, and walked slowly toward the elevator to meet the police officers who were about to formally arrest my parents for criminal trespassing. The elevator descent from the 4th floor took exactly 12 seconds. I spent those seconds adjusting my blazer and composing my breathing, ensuring my heart rate was as slow and steady as a ticking clock. When the polished steel doors slid open onto the ground floor, the atmosphere in the lobby was thick enough to cut with a knife. My parents were completely trapped. The security guards had successfully locked the revolving front doors, creating a physical barrier between my mother and the street outside. Thomas and Diane were cornered, hyperventilating slightly, but still clinging desperately to their manufactured outrage. When they saw me step out of the elevator, my father practically foamed at the mouth, pointing his finger at me like a loaded weapon. "You coward, my father!" spat, his voice echoing off the marble walls. "You are finally coming down here to face the music. Tell your boss the truth, Gemma. Tell all these people how you locked your own sister out of her rightful inheritance. You cannot hide your greed behind these corporate walls forever." My colleagues, dozens of highly educated digital marketing professionals, stood completely frozen in a massive semicircle around the reception desk. Some of them looked sympathetic, but others looked genuinely conflicted. My parents had screamed some incredibly vile accusations, and in the court of public opinion, a weeping mother usually held the advantage over a silent executive. My mother, sensing the hesitation in the crowd, seized the opportunity to double down on her performance. She clutched her chest and let out a pathetic, theatrical sob. "We just want what is best for the baby," my mother cried out, turning to address the crowd of employees directly. "We are a good family. We are upstanding citizens. We only came here today because Gemma has completely lost her mind to grief. She needs psychiatric help, not a corporate paycheck." I remained icy, completely unfazed by their desperate attempts to control the narrative. I did not raise my voice, and I did not offer a single word of defense. I looked directly at the head of building security, a massive former military officer named Davis, and raised a single hand. I signaled for him to hold his position and delay physical intervention for just 60 seconds. Davis gave me a tight nod and crossed his arms, stepping back just an inch to give me the floor. I walked slowly toward the central reception desk. Directly behind the massive quartz counter hung a 90-inch state-of-the-art smart television monitor. We used it daily to broadcast our agency's highest-performing digital campaigns and live analytics dashboards to visiting corporate clients. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and navigated to my secure cloud storage application. With a few swift taps on my screen, I engaged the wireless casting feature, immediately overriding the promotional video currently playing on the monitor. The massive screen went black for a fraction of a second before my device synced successfully. I turned to face my colleagues, then looked directly into my mother's fake, tear-filled eyes. "You came to my place of work to expose the truth to my peers," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent lobby. "I think that is a fantastic idea. Let us give them the entire truth." I pressed play on my phone screen. The high-definition audio system built into the lobby's architecture crackled to life. It was not a hidden wire or an illegal recording. It was the crystal-clear, legally obtained audio file pulled directly from my front porch security camera, From the morning they tried to drill through my door locks. The recording captured the exact moment I had walked back inside my house to call the police, leaving my parents and Brittany standing alone on the porch. The audio echoed through the lobby with pristine clarity. My sister's voice blasted through the speakers, first sounding agitated and completely dropping the grieving mother act. "What if she does not back down?" Brittany's recorded voice asked. "What if she actually hires a lawyer to fight the will?" "I am completely out of time, Mom. The credit card companies are going to garnish my husband's wages by the end of the month." Then my mother's voice filled the room. It was not the weeping, sympathetic tone she was currently using to manipulate my colleagues. It was a cold, calculating, and purely malicious sneer. The real Diane was finally on full display. "Do not panic, Brittany," my mother's voice commanded from the speakers. "We have the upper hand. Just force her to sell the house, take the cash to pay off your debt, and I will testify to the judge that she is mentally unstable. We will tell the court the grief made her a danger to herself. Once they lock her in a psychiatric ward for a mandatory hold, we can liquidate the estate without her interference. She is isolated. She has no one left to defend her. We are going to take every last cent." I paused the playback. The silence that followed was absolute, deafening, and completely suffocating. Not a single person in the lobby dared to breathe. The colleagues who had previously looked at me with doubt or suspicion completely dropped their jaws in sheer, unadulterated horror. They stared at my mother, their expressions morphing from confusion into pure disgust. They had just listened to a mother casually plot to falsely imprison her own grieving daughter in a psychiatric ward just to steal her dead husband's money and cover up a massive mountain of hidden debt. My mother's jaw hung open. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost. Her theatrical tears instantly evaporated. She looked frantically around the room, realizing that every single person in the building was now looking at her like she was a monster. She had wanted to publicly shame me, but I had just broadcasted her absolute moral bankruptcy to an audience of 80 professionals. My father stumbled backward, physically reeling from the impact of the recording. He opened his mouth to formulate a defense to claim the audio was doctored or out of context, but there was absolutely no spinning that quote. The malice was undeniable. The premeditated financial abuse was explicitly stated. Marcus, who had been watching from the second-floor balcony, let out a low whistle of pure disbelief. He leaned over the glass railing, his face hardened with absolute disgust. "Davis, secure the perimeter," Marcus ordered loudly. "Nobody leaves until law enforcement arrives. I want these two prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." In the distance, filtering through the thick glass of the locked front doors, the rising wail of police sirens began to echo down the Seattle street. The authorities were pulling up to the plaza. I tucked my phone back into my pocket, walked directly up to my mother, and looked down at her shaking, pathetic form. I smiled, feeling absolutely nothing but victory. "Your audience has heard enough," I whispered. "Let us see how your performance plays out in front of a federal judge." The flashing red and blue lights of the Seattle Police Department cruisers washed through the massive glass facade of the lobby, painting the terrified faces of my parents in rhythmic, inescapable neon strokes. Two uniformed officers strode through the revolving doors the moment Davis unlocked them. They moved with the crisp, no-nonsense authority of seasoned veterans who had absolutely zero patience for corporate disturbances. My father, clinging to his lifelong delusion that his wealth and social status made him immune to consequences, immediately puffed out his chest and marched toward them. He attempted to deploy his golf course charm, raising his hands in a placating gesture while trying to laugh off the situation as a simple family misunderstanding. "Officer, thank goodness you are here." My father began, his voice dripping with forced condescension. "There is no need for alarm. My wife and I just had a minor disagreement with our daughter. It is a private domestic matter. We will just be on our way now." The lead officer did not even break stride. He completely bypassed my father's outstretched hand, his eyes scanning the room until they locked onto Davis. The head of security handed the officer a tablet displaying the live feed of the security cameras, explicitly highlighting the exact moment my father aggressively shoved the junior guard. Thomas and Diane, the officer, announced, his voice projecting a lethal calm across the silent atrium. You are both under arrest for criminal trespassing, disturbing the peace, and simple assault. Turn around and place your hands behind your backs. The reality of the situation hit my mother like a physical blow. The theatrical, manipulative tears she had been shedding mere minutes ago were instantly replaced by the raw, hyperventilating panic of a woman who had never faced a real consequence in her entire life. She stumbled backward, her designer heels slipping on the polished marble floor. "Thomas, do something," she shrieked, batting away the officer's hand as he reached for her wrist. "You cannot arrest us. We have a vacation home in Aspen. We are the victims here. She is stealing our grandson's inheritance." The second officer did not hesitate. He grasped my mother's arm with professional efficiency, spun her around, and snapped a pair of heavy steel handcuffs over her wrists. The sharp metallic click echoed through the lobby like a gunshot. My father, realizing that his privilege held zero currency in this room, completely lost whatever remained of his composure. He began shouting obscenities, violently struggling against the lead officer, which only resulted in him being slammed face first against the court's reception desk. Another pair of handcuffs secured his wrists tightly. My colleagues watched in stunned silence as the two people who had just stormed into our headquarters demanding my termination were forcibly frog-marched toward the exit. Right before they reached the doors, my father dug his heels into the floor, turning his head to look back at me. His face was purple with rage and utter humiliation. "Gemma, drop the charges," he ordered, his voice cracking under the immense strain. "You cannot do this to your own mother and father. Keep this in the family. Tell them it was a terrible mistake. If you let them take us out of this building in chains, I swear to you I will never forgive you." I stepped forward, closing the distance between us until I was standing just a few feet away from his restrained, pathetic form. "I do not want your forgiveness, Thomas," I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "I want you to rot. Get them out of my lobby." I watched the officers shove my parents into the back of the squad cars, the heavy doors slamming shut on their pristine suburban reputation. As the cruisers pulled away from the curb, a collective staggered breath released throughout the lobby. My colleagues slowly began to disperse, offering me quiet nods of solidarity and whispered apologies for ever doubting my character. Marcus placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder, telling me to take all the time I needed and that the company's legal team would supply the police with all the security footage required for the criminal prosecution. I had won the battle. I grabbed my box of hard drives, walked out the back exit, and drove straight home. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of quiet, calculated preparation. I sat in my empty, massive house, the silence feeling less like a tomb and more like a fortress. The tide was officially turning. Terrence was operating inside enemy lines, preparing to secure the biological evidence that would permanently destroy Brittany's case. My parents were sitting in a downtown holding cell, their credibility completely shattered by a felony arrest record. All I had to do was wait for Veronica to finalize the civil suit and watch the fraudulent empire collapse. By 9 o'clock that night, a heavy rain had started to fall, washing the Seattle streets in a cold, rhythmic downpour. I was sitting in Liam's old leather armchair in the study, reviewing the preliminary DNA laboratory protocols on my laptop, when a sudden, violently aggressive knock echoed through the house. I froze. My immediate instinct was to check the front porch security feed. I pulled up the camera app on my phone. Standing on my porch, getting completely drenched by the freezing rain, was a tall man in a cheap beige trench coat. He was holding a thick manila envelope perfectly dry under his arm. He did not look like police, and he certainly did not look like a neighborhood trespasser. I walked to the front door, leaving the heavy steel deadbolts engaged, and spoke directly through the intercom. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice guarded. "Are you Gemma?" the man shouted back, fighting to be heard over the pounding rain. "I need verbal confirmation of your identity right now." "I am Gemma," I replied. The man immediately shoved the thick manila envelope into the brass mail slot on my door. It hit the hardwood floor of my foyer with a heavy, ominous thud. "You have been formally served," the man said. "Have a good night." He turned on his heel and jogged back down the driveway, disappearing into the dark, stormy night without another word. I stared at the envelope on the floor. A cold knot formed in the pit of my stomach. I slowly knelt down, picked up the damp package, and tore the top open. I pulled out a massive stack of legal documents, the bright red urgent stamp practically glowing in the dim light of the hallway. It was a court summons accompanied by a highly aggressive emergency motion filed by Brittany's new legal counsel. I scanned the dense, aggressive legal jargon, my eyes darting across the pages as the full weight of the threat materialized. Brittany had found a predatory lawyer willing to work on contingency, and they were not waiting for the standard probate court process to play out. They had filed an emergency injunction demanding the immediate forced liquidation of my $986,000 estate. The motion maliciously claimed that Leo was in imminent financial peril and required the immediate establishment of a trust fund using the direct proceeds from my house sale. I flipped to the final page, my heart pounding against my ribs. The judge had already signed the preliminary review. The bottom of the document contained a strict, legally binding mandate. I had to vacate the premises and surrender the property deed to an independent liquidator for auction. The deadline for full legal compliance was the absolute end of the week. The war was far from over. In fact, the final, most brutal battle had just begun. I stood in the dimly lit foyer staring at the aggressive court summons in my hands as the freezing rain continued to batter the front door. The predatory lawyer Brittany had hired was banking on panic. They wanted to force a rapid liquidation of my property before a probate judge could thoroughly examine the underlying evidence. I walked straight to my kitchen island, flattened the documents under the bright pendant lights, and took high-resolution photographs of every single page. I sent the images directly to Veronica with a single text message that read, "Stop this auction." I did not sleep that night. I paced the hardwood floors of my nearly $1 million home, drinking black coffee and mentally preparing for the brutal legal combat that was about to consume my entire week. By 8 o'clock the next morning, the storm had broken, leaving the Seattle skyline washed in a pale gray light. I was sitting at my dining room table drafting a timeline of Brittany's financial fraud for Veronica's paralegal when my cell phone vibrated violently against the wood. The caller ID flashed Terrence's name. I answered immediately, swiping the screen and holding the phone to my ear. "Terrence," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "Did you get the sample to the clinic?" There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. For a second I thought the connection had dropped. Then I heard the jagged, uneven sound of a man struggling to draw oxygen into his lungs. Gemma Terrence finally whispered. His voice was trembling so violently that the syllables barely held together. "I am sitting in my car in the laboratory parking lot. The geneticist just handed me the expedited report." I stopped typing on my laptop and closed my eyes, bracing myself for the impact of the words I knew were coming. "Tell me," I demanded softly. "It is a 0% probability," Terrence choked out a raw, guttural sob finally breaking through his throat. "I am completely mathematically excluded. I have zero genetic relationship to the child sleeping in my nursery. Leo is not my son. He has never been my son. Every single moment of my fatherhood was a complete and absolute lie. I let him cry. I did not offer empty platitudes or hollow comforts because there was absolutely no comfort to be found in the total annihilation of his family. He had spent the last year of his life changing diapers at 3 a.m, sacrificing his career trajectory and pouring every ounce of his soul into a child that his wife had conceived with another man. "Terrence, listen to me," I said, cutting through his despair with absolute surgical precision. "I know the pain you are feeling right now is unbearable, but you need to compartmentalize it for just a little while longer. We have a rapidly closing window to destroy her legal strategy. Did they run the secondary markers against Liam's medical profile like Veronica requested?" I heard him shift in his car seat, the rustle of heavy paper echoing through the speaker. "Yes," he replied, his voice flattening into a dull, hollow monotone. "You were right about that too. They cross-referenced the child's genetic sequence against the hereditary markers present in your husband's family line. There is absolutely no intersection. Liam is definitively not the biological father either. The confirmation washed over me like a wave of pure, absolute vindication. Brittany's entire forged will, her dramatic backyard performance, and the emergency injunction threatening my home were all built on a massive biological impossibility. She had rolled the dice assuming that because Liam was dead, his DNA could never be subpoenaed to contest the claim. She had severely underestimated my resources. "If it is not me," Terrence asked, the heartbreak in his voice rapidly hardening into a cold, terrifying anger. "And if it is not Liam, then who the hell is it? Who did she do this with?" I opened my email inbox. 5 minutes before Terrence called, Veronica had forwarded me a highly encrypted file from her private investigator. The investigator had taken the liberty of running the anonymous genetic profile obtained from the swab against a vast network of commercial ancestry databases and private medical registries. It had taken a team of digital analysts less than 3 hours to find a direct, undeniable familial match. "I have the answer right in front of me," I told him, clicking the decrypted file open on my screen. I scanned the personal details, the pieces of Brittany's double life, finally aligning into a sickeningly clear picture. "Do you remember a man named Bradley?" Terrence went completely silent. The name hung in the air like a live grenade. Bradley. Terrence repeated, his breathing suddenly turning sharp and shallow. Bradley was the senior vice president of the hospitality group where Brittany worked before she quit to become a full-time influencer. He is 45 years old. I continued reading the heavily detailed dossier the investigator had compiled. He has been married to the daughter of a prominent Seattle real estate developer for 15 years. He is also extremely wealthy, heavily leveraged in commercial properties, and currently sits on the board of 3 major philanthropic organizations. "Oh my God," Terrence whispered, the realization hitting him with the force of a freight train. The networking dinners, the late-night strategy sessions at the hospitality firm. She was not working. She was sleeping with her boss. And when she got pregnant, I added, connecting the final devastating dots. Bradley panicked. He is a high-profile executive whose entire wealth is tied directly to his wife's family empire. A divorce stemming from an affair with a junior employee would financially ruin him. So Brittany presented him with a solution. She quit her job, married the stable, hardworking architect, and passed the baby off as yours. Terrence let out a dark, hollow laugh that contained absolutely zero humor. "And the fake influencer brand trips?" he asked. "Paid for by Bradley," I confirmed. He could not risk a direct paper trail of wire transfers, so he gave her access to a secondary corporate card to fund her luxury hotel stays in Miami and Los Angeles, which is where they continued the affair. But something changed recently. Bradley either cut her off to protect himself, or she maxed out the secondary cards. That is why she is secretly drowning in $150,000 of unsecured debt. She lost her sugar daddy, the creditors are circling, and she needed a massive immediate cash injection to keep her fake life afloat. "So she targeted your house," Terrence said, his voice dropping an octave, settling into a terrifying, icy resolve. "She forged the will, blamed Liam because he could not defend himself, and tried to steal your $1 million estate to replace Bradley's money." "Exactly," I said. "She thought she was untouchable. But now we have the DNA evidence and we have Bradley's identity. We hold the absolute power to destroy her marriage, expose his infidelity to his wealthy wife, and permanently dismantle her fraudulent legal claim, all in one single coordinated strike." "Terrence, bring that laboratory report to Veronica's office right now. We are going on the offensive." I ended the call and placed my phone face down on the dining room table. The heavy silence of the massive house settled around me, but my mind was operating at lightning speed. Every single chaotic event of the past 72 hours was rapidly coalescing into a perfectly engineered, terrifyingly clear picture. The sheer sociopathic brilliance of Brittany's plan was actually staggering once you stripped away the emotional manipulation and looked at the cold, hard mechanics of her strategy. She had not chosen Liam out of random spite or lingering family jealousy. She had chosen him because he was a dead man, and a dead man cannot order a court-mandated paternity test. A living man accused of fathering a secret child would instantly demand biological proof. He would march into a clinic, provide a genetic sample, and completely dismantle her lies within 48 hours. But Liam was gone. His body was cremated, his voice was permanently silenced, and his legal standing was transferred entirely to me, a grieving widow, completely blindsided by a fake will. By framing a dead man, Brittany effectively bypassed the single most dangerous threat to her entire operation. She weaponized his sudden death to secure an airtight biological alibi. The financial motive was equally ruthless and calculated. The emergency injunction demanding the forced sale of my $986,000 home was never actually about securing a stable future for Leo. It was a desperate, high-stakes bank robbery designed to instantly erase her crushing liabilities. She needed a massive cash injection to completely wipe out the $150,000 in unsecured credit card debt before her creditors aggressively garnished Terrence's wages and exposed her double life. But stealing my house was only half of her predatory equation. By pinning the paternity on Liam and securing a six-figure payout from my estate, she could keep Terrence completely in the dark. He would continue working his exhausting 60-hour weeks, paying their massive mortgage, and raising another man's child in blissful, oblivious loyalty. Meanwhile, the true biological father presented an entirely separate stream of illicit revenue. Bradley was an exceptionally wealthy corporate executive, terrified of losing his marriage to the daughter of a prominent real estate tycoon. Brittany was undoubtedly using the permanent threat of a massive public scandal to secretly extort him on the side. She was bleeding Bradley dry every single month. I could perfectly picture the discreet, untraceable wire transfers or the envelopes of cash handed over in dark hotel parking lots. She had trapped a desperate high-net-worth executive in a permanent cycle of blackmail. But Bradley's hush money was meant to be her secret slush fund, the untouchable wealth that funded her illusion of influencer success. When her reckless credit card spending finally caught up with her, she could not ask Bradley for a sudden $150,000 lump sum without risking him calling her bluff or hiring his own ruthless lawyers to silence her permanently. She needed a completely separate, perfectly legal windfall to cover her massive public debts. She was double-dipping in the most malicious way possible, demanding under-the-table child support from a cornered millionaire while simultaneously robbing her grieving sister blind. As the absolute chilling reality of her character washed over me, my gaze drifted across the dining room to the hallway, settling on the antique oak coat rack where Liam used to hang his jacket. The sight of it triggered a sudden vivid memory, pulling me sharply back to a freezing December evening, exactly 2 years ago. Liam and I had just returned from a massive holiday dinner hosted by my parents. Brittany had spent the entire evening complaining about her lack of corporate sponsors, loudly lamenting how difficult it was to build a digital brand from scratch. She had cornered me in the kitchen, crying artificial tears, begging me to co-sign a massive personal loan so she could afford better photography equipment and a trip to an exclusive networking retreat in Miami. I had felt a twinge of sisterly guilt and actually considered helping her out. When we got back to our house that night, I had pitched the idea to Liam while we were unwinding in the living room. I will never forget the sudden intense shift in his demeanor. He had set down his glass of whiskey, turned off the television, and looked at me with an expression of absolute, unyielding severity. "Gemma, you are never to lend your sister a single dime." Liam had stated, his voice completely devoid of any warmth or compromise. "Not a loan, not a gift, not a co-signature. You will completely sever your finances from hers." I had been taken aback by his harshness. I tried to defend her, arguing that she was just ambitious and struggling to find her footing in a highly competitive industry. Liam had shaken his head slowly, his eyes locked onto mine with a terrifying clarity. "She is not ambitious." Gemma, Liam had warned me, his words echoing in my mind now like a dark prophecy. "She is a parasite. I watch the way she manipulates your parents. I watch the way she treats Terrence like a disposable wallet. She lacks a fundamental moral compass." She will bleed you dry smile to your face and then blame you for bleeding. If you give her access to your money, she will eventually try to take everything you have. She is a dangerous sociopathic woman who will completely destroy anyone standing between her and what she wants. I had brushed his warning off at the time, chalking it up to his natural cynicism and his general distaste for my family's dramatic dynamics. But standing here 2 years later, holding the aggressive legal documents that threatened to strip me of the very home we built together, the sheer accuracy of his assessment hit me with the force of a physical blow. Liam had seen it. He had looked right through Brittany's manufactured smiles, her fake designer clothes, and her carefully curated victim complex. He had recognized the absolute monster lurking beneath the surface long before the rest of us even suspected a thing. He had tried to protect me, establishing firm boundaries to keep her chaotic greed out of our lives. A fresh wave of grief hit my chest, but this time it was not the paralyzing, suffocating sorrow of a widow. It was a sharp, burning, and violently protective grief. Brittany had not just tried to steal his money, she had weaponized his memory. She had dragged a deeply honorable man's reputation through the mud, branding him a cheater and a deadbeat father, all to facilitate a cheap financial heist. She had painted me into a corner, assuming I would simply surrender my home to avoid the agonizing public humiliation of a prolonged paternity scandal. She thought I was weak. She thought the grief had completely broken my spirit. But grief is a powerful, transformative fire, and mine had just forged into an indestructible weapon. I grabbed my car keys off the kitchen counter and slipped my arms into my heavy winter coat. Terrence was already en route to Veronica's office with the irrefutable genetic proof. The trap was fully set, the legal mechanisms were locked into place, and the explosives were wired directly to the foundation of Brittany's fake life. I walked out the front door, stepping into the brisk, unforgiving Seattle morning air, and locked the deadbolt firmly behind me. It was time to pay a highly unexpected visit to a certain senior vice president of hospitality. I gripped the steering wheel of my car, the cold leather grounding me against the massive surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins. My initial impulse was to drive straight to the massive corporate headquarters of Bradley's hospitality group Storm, past his receptionists, and throw the undeniable DNA evidence directly onto his mahogany desk. I wanted to watch the color drain from his face as I threatened to call his billionaire father-in-law and expose his entire illicit double life. But as I pulled out of my driveway and navigated the winding, rain-slicked Seattle streets, the cold, calculating side of my brain rapidly seized control. Ambushing a powerful, well-connected executive on his own turf was a massive tactical error. He would immediately summon his corporate security hide behind his expensive legal team and potentially alert Brittany that the walls were completely closing in on her. I did not want a messy, chaotic skirmish in a corporate lobby. I wanted a perfectly synchronized, highly public execution. To achieve that level of absolute destruction, I needed all of my enemies in a single controlled environment where they had absolutely no avenue of escape. I hit the turn signal, abruptly changing lanes, and completely abandoned the route to the hospitality firm. Instead, I drove straight into the heart of the downtown financial district, pulling into the secure underground parking garage of Veronica's high-rise law firm. When I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the private conference room, the atmosphere was thick with lethal intent. Terrence was already sitting at the long marble table. He looked absolutely exhausted, his eyes bloodshot and his posture rigid, but the debilitating sorrow from this morning had completely evaporated. It was replaced by a terrifying, hyper-focused rage. He was holding a styrofoam cup of black coffee, his knuckles white as he gripped it. Spread out across the table in front of him were the official laboratory DNA results, bearing the undeniable mathematical proof of his wife's catastrophic infidelity. Veronica stood at the head of the table, flanked by two junior paralegals. She looked like an apex predator who had just cornered her prey. When she saw me enter, she offered a sharp, dangerous smile. "We have the entire picture," Gemma Veronica announced, tapping a manicured finger against a thick stack of printed documents. "The genetic sequencing is completely irrefutable. We cross-referenced the paternity exclusion with the financial dossiers my investigator compiled. The timeline of Brittany's explosive credit card debt perfectly aligns with Bradley's sudden withdrawal of financial support. She is drowning in liabilities, the creditors are preparing to file suit, and she is desperately trying to use your property as a massive cash life raft. Terrence looked up at me, his face an unreadable mask of cold granite. I want her completely destroyed, he stated, his voice devoid of any warmth or hesitation. I want her to lose everything. I want the debt to crush her. I want the federal fraud charges to stick. And I want full, undisputed custody of the child. She used him as a disposable pawn. I am the only real parent he has ever known, and I will not let her drag him down into a prison cell with her. I pulled out a leather chair and sat down directly across from him. We are going to give her exactly what she wants, I said softly, looking back and forth between Terrence and my lawyer. We are going to give her the house. Terrence frowned in deep confusion, but Veronica immediately caught my drift. Her smile widened into a full predatory grin. It is a classic legal ambush, Veronica explained to Terrence, leaning forward and resting her hands on the marble table. Right now, Brittany has committed forgery and filed a fraudulent injunction. That is incredibly bad, but a highly paid defense attorney might try to argue she was operating under severe emotional distress or false information regarding the paternity. But if we invite her directly to the property, and she physically attempts to execute the transfer of $1 million asset using those forged documents in front of multiple witnesses, the threshold for felony wire fraud, grand larceny, and extortion becomes absolute. We catch her in the exact moment of the illegal transaction. She needs to believe she has finally broken my spirit, I added, pulling my cell phone out of my coat pocket. My parents are currently sitting in a holding cell at the downtown precinct, waiting for a bail hearing after their stunt at my office. Brittany is panicking. She thinks the pressure is finally mounting and that my corporate reputation is severely damaged. I need to sell the illusion that I am completely overwhelmed, terrified of losing my career, and desperate to end the public harassment. I unlocked my screen and navigated directly to the family group chat. The digital thread had been entirely silent since the disastrous morning of the funeral. The participants were myself, Brittany, my father, and my mother. Terrence was also in the chat, sitting right next to me, his own phone resting face down on the table. I stared at the blinking cursor. This required a massive swallow of pride. I had to type the exact words that would temporarily grant my sister the ultimate unearned victory. I had to sound utterly defeated, stripped of my defenses, and begging for a truce. I took a deep breath and began typing, my thumbs moving swiftly across the glass screen. You win. Bring your lawyer to my house this Saturday at 10 a.m. I will sign the transfer papers for the property. I read the text message twice, ensuring the tone was sufficiently flat and submissive. There was no argument, no legal jargon, and no defensive posturing. It was the digital equivalent of waving a white flag and dropping to my knees. I pressed send. The message bubbled onto the screen in bright blue. A fraction of a second later, Terrence's phone vibrated harshly against the marble table. He did not touch it. He just stared at the wooden grain of the table, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might crack under the pressure. Now we wait, Veronica whispered, dismissing her two paralegals with a swift flick of her wrist. The silence in the conference room was agonizing. 1 minute passed, then 2. I could vividly picture Brittany sitting in her pristine suburban living room, surrounded by maxed-out credit card bills and fake designer handbags, staring at her screen in sheer disbelief. She had gambled her entire existence on a massive, highly illegal bluff, and she genuinely believed I had just folded my hand. On the 3rd minute, the 3 little gray dots appeared at the bottom of the chat interface, indicating that she was typing. The dots danced for several long seconds, paused, and then danced again. She was likely drafting a massive gloating paragraph about how she always knew I would do the right thing, or how justice for Liam was finally being served to a grieving mother. But then the typing indicator vanished completely. Instead of words, my phone emitted a single sharp chime. I looked down at the illuminated screen. Brittany had not sent a speech. She had sent a single highly calculated image. It was a triumphant, deeply condescending emoji of a clinking champagne glass. It was the ultimate expression of pure sociopathic arrogance. She was actively celebrating the theft of a dead man's legacy and the financial ruin of her own sister. She thought she was the smartest person in the room. She thought she had successfully manipulated the legal system, betrayed her devoted husband, and secured her illicit payday without leaving a single trace of evidence. I turned my phone around and slid it across the marble table toward Terence. He looked at the champagne glass emoji, his eyes narrowing into dark, incredibly dangerous slits. He slowly reached out and picked up his own phone, navigating to the chat and reading the message for himself. Saturday at 10 in the morning, Terence repeated, his voice cold as absolute ice. I looked at Veronica, who was already pulling up the contact information for an independent forensic auditor and the local precinct commander she kept on speed dial. "Let her drink the champagne today," I said, leaning back in my leather chair and feeling the absolute terrifying calm of a perfectly set trap washing over me. "Because on Saturday morning we are going to completely burn her world to ash." Saturday morning arrived with a blinding, mocking sunlight that spilled across the polished hardwood floors of my foyer. The heavy grandfather clock in the hallway struck 10, exactly, its deep chime echoing through the massive, unnervingly quiet house. I stood by the front window, nursing a cup of black coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago, watching a sleek black luxury SUV pull into my pristine driveway. The doors opened, and the invaders stepped onto the concrete. The absolute audacity of their arrival made my blood run ice cold. My parents had clearly posted bail. My father Thomas stepped out first, adjusting his expensive Italian silk tie as if he had not just spent 48 hours in a downtown holding cell for assaulting a corporate security guard. He looked slightly haggard, the dark circles under his eyes betraying his immense stress, but his posture remained rigid, with that sickening, arrogant entitlement. My mother Diane emerged next, wearing a sharply tailored pearl-white pantsuit, clutching her designer handbag like a literal shield. Then came Brittany. She was practically glowing, wearing a highly inappropriate bright red designer dress that screamed absolute victory. Trailing behind them was a man I did not recognize, a greasy-looking individual in an ill-fitting gray suit carrying a battered leather briefcase. This had to be the predatory contingency fee lawyer who had drafted the aggressive emergency injunction. I walked to the front door and unlocked the deadbolt, pulling it open just as my sister raised her hand to knock. Brittany did not wait for an invitation. She simply pushed past me, the overpowering scent of her expensive, heavily sprayed floral perfume invading my sanctuary. Thomas and Diane followed close behind, completely ignoring my presence as they stepped into the foyer. The lawyer brought up the rear, wiping his shoes on the welcome mat with exaggerated, insulting slowness, before offering me a slimy, yellow-toothed grin. "Good morning," the lawyer said, his voice dripping with cheap, rehearsed professionalism. "I am Arthur Vance, representing your sister. We appreciate your sudden cooperation in this highly sensitive family matter." I did not offer him a greeting. I closed the front door, engaging the heavy brass lock with a loud, definitive click, sealing them all inside the trap. Brittany was already standing in the center of the living room, her hands resting on her hips as she surveyed the expansive vaulted ceilings and the massive stone fireplace Liam had built by hand. She looked like a conqueror assessing a freshly captured territory. She did not see a home filled with memories of a loving marriage. She saw a massive immediate cash payout to save her from complete financial ruin. "The natural light in here is actually decent," Brittany announced to the room, her voice echoing off the high walls. "But this furniture is completely depressing. It is far too dark and entirely dated. The real estate agent is going to want to stage the entire house with lighter modern pieces before we list it for the auction. We should probably just hire a liquidation crew to haul all of this out by Monday morning." My father walked over to the custom hand-carved mahogany dining table that Liam and I had purchased on our honeymoon in Italy. He ran his hand over the smooth wood grain, a look of greedy calculation washing over his face. "The table is solid wood," Thomas muttered, knocking his knuckles against the surface. "Do not just throw it out, Brittany. We can easily get $3,000 or $4,000 for this dining set on a private auction site. We need to maximize the immediate liquid capital before the house officially goes on the market. Every single dollar counts right now. I stood near the archway of the kitchen, maintaining absolute silence. I let them talk. I let them touch my things. I needed them to feel completely comfortable, absolutely certain of their victory, because arrogant confidence was the essential fuel for the trap I had set. My mother drifted toward the mantel, picking up a framed silver photograph of Liam and me standing on a beach in Hawaii. She looked at it for a brief second before carelessly tossing it face down onto the stone hearth. The glass cracked slightly, the sharp sound echoing through the quiet room. She turned to face me, adopting that deeply patronizing, sickly sweet tone she always used when she was about to deliver a profound targeted insult. "Now, Gemma," my mother said, clasping her hands together in front of her waist, "I know this feels incredibly sudden and difficult for you, but you really must look at the bigger picture here. You are a childless widow. You are completely alone. What possible use do you have for a massive 4-bedroom estate in this highly desirable school district? It is entirely selfish for you to hoard all this space and wealth when your own sister has a helpless, fatherless baby to raise." The sheer magnitude of her hypocrisy was absolutely breathtaking. She was lecturing me about family sacrifices while actively participating in a criminal scheme to render me homeless and steal my dead husband's money to pay off her daughter's secret credit card debt. Family requires sacrifice. Gemma? My mother continued, taking a step closer to me, her eyes completely devoid of any genuine maternal warmth. We all have to do things we do not want to do for the ultimate survival of the bloodline. Brittany needs the financial stability that this property provides. Liam would have wanted his actual biological son to be taken care of. You doing the right thing today, signing these papers, it is the only way you can begin to redeem yourself for the horrible way you have treated us this week. I am willing to overlook the absolute embarrassment you caused your father and me at your office, provided you sign the transfer deed quietly and vacate the premises by Wednesday. Arthur Vance, the sleazy attorney, placed his battered leather briefcase onto my Italian mahogany dining table. He popped the brass latches, opened the lid, and pulled out a thick stack of pristine legal documents. He arranged them neatly, pulling a silver fountain pen from his breast pocket and placing it perfectly parallel to the signature line. "The documents are fully prepared," Arthur announced, tapping the paperwork with a blunt fingernail. "This is a binding, irrevocable transfer of the property deed into a newly established trust managed entirely by your sister for the sole benefit of the minor child Leo. Once you sign this page, you forfeit all legal right, title, and interest in the estate. The auction process will commence immediately. If you could just step over here, we can conclude this ugly business and let the healing process begin." Brittany walked over to the table and stood next to her lawyer. She looked at me, a massive, uncontainable smirk spreading across her face. The champagne emoji made flesh. She had done it. She genuinely believed she had completely broken me, bypassed the rigorous probate court system, and secured the ultimate payday without ever having to answer a single question about the massive gaping holes in her story. "Are you going to sign it, or are you just going to stand there staring at me?" Brittany demanded, tapping her designer nails impatiently against the hardwood table. "I have a contractor meeting across town at noon to get quotes on repainting the exterior before the listing goes live. I do not have all day, Gemma." I slowly walked across the living room, feeling the eyes of the 4 vultures burning into my back. I stopped right in front of the dining table, looking down at the stark black ink of the property transfer deed. I reached out and picked up the silver pen. Brittany let out a sharp, triumphant sigh of relief. My parents exchanged a victorious, greedy glance. They believed they were mere seconds away from stealing $1 million. I held the pen over the signature line, hovering the tip just a fraction of an inch above the thick paper. Then I slowly looked up, staring directly into Brittany's eyes, completely dropping the defeated facade. I offered her a cold, terrifying smile. "I would absolutely love to sign this, Brittany," I said, my voice cutting through the silent room like a serrated blade. "But there is just one minor administrative issue we need to clear up first. The sole beneficiary on this trust document is listed as Liam's biological son, But unfortunately for you, the biological father is standing right behind that door. I dropped the silver pen onto the table. It landed with a loud clatter. I turned my head toward the closed French doors of my private study and gave a single definitive nod. The brass handles turned simultaneously, the heavy wooden doors swung open, and the absolute destruction of Brittany's fraudulent empire officially began. Terence stepped out of the study first, crossing the threshold of the French doors with long, heavy strides. He did not look like the exhausted, broken man I had found sitting on the concrete bench outside my office. He was standing perfectly straight, his shoulders squared, radiating an aura of absolute, terrifying fury. Right behind him walked Veronica, my attorney, holding a pristine manila folder and wearing a smile that could easily cut glass. But it was the third person to emerge from the study that caused the air to violently leave Brittany's lungs. Stepping cautiously into the natural light of the living room, looking physically ill and sweating profusely through his custom-tailored Italian suit, was Bradley. Brittany's smug, victorious smirk vanished instantly. Her jaw literally dropped open, and the designer handbag she had been clutching slipped from her fingers, hitting the hardwood floor with a heavy thud. She took a staggered step backward, her eyes darting frantically between her husband and her former boss. The realization of what was happening crashed over her like a tidal wave. Her airtight, foolproof plan had just been entirely blown to pieces. My parents, Thomas and Diane, simply stared in profound confusion. They recognized Terence, of course, but Bradley was a complete stranger to them. Arthur Vance, the predatory lawyer who had been moments away from securing his contingency fee, immediately stiffened. His legal instincts were sharp enough to recognize a massive ambush, and his eyes darted toward the front door, silently calculating his fastest escape route. "Allow me to introduce the actual guest of honor," I announced, my voice echoing clearly through the silent room. "Mom, Dad, I would like you to meet Bradley. He is the senior vice president of the hospitality group where Brittany used to work. He is also a married man. But most importantly, according to the highly expedited genetic sequencing, we rushed through a private laboratory yesterday. He is the biological father of your grandson." Terence walked directly up to the mahogany dining table. He did not even look at my parents. He locked his furious gaze entirely onto his wife. He reached into his blazer pocket, pulled out the certified DNA laboratory report, and slammed it down onto the table right next to the fraudulent property transfer deed. 0% probability. Terence stated, his voice a low, lethal growl that made my father physically flinch. "I swabbed the inside of his cheek myself while you were sleeping. I am completely mathematically excluded. You looked me in the eye every single day for 2 years and made me raise another man's child. You let me drain my savings. You let me work 60-hour weeks to support your fake lifestyle. And you used my son as a disposable prop in your disgusting financial heist." Brittany opened her mouth to speak, to spin another desperate web of lies, but her throat completely seized up. There was absolutely no maneuvering out of this. The biological evidence was sitting on the table in stark black and white. Bradley, Veronica commanded, her voice cracking through the room like a whip. "Tell them exactly what you told me in my office last night when we served you with the subpoena." Bradley stepped forward, frantically wiping the sweat from his forehead with a silk pocket square. He looked at Brittany not with affection, but with pure, unadulterated hatred. Veronica had cornered him the previous evening, offering him a brutal ultimatum. He could either cooperate and provide a full confession, or he could be publicly named as a co-conspirator in a multi-million-dollar fraud case that would trigger a massive federal investigation and permanently end his marriage to a billionaire's daughter. He had folded in less than 5 minutes. "She blackmailed me," Bradley confessed, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and raw anger. "We had an affair before she quit the firm. When she got pregnant, she demanded I fund her fake influencer lifestyle in exchange for my absolute silence. I gave her a secondary corporate credit card to pay for her luxury trips and designer clothes. But last month, corporate accounting flagged the massive irregular spending. I had to cut off the card to protect myself. I told her I could not give her another dime without my wife finding out. Veronica stepped up to the table smoothly, taking control of the narrative. And because she lost her secret sugar daddy, Veronica explained, looking directly at the sleazy lawyer she was suddenly left holding $150,000 in unsecured credit card debt. The creditors were circling. She needed a massive cash injection immediately. So she forged a will, framed my client's dead husband, and attempted to legally steal a $1 million estate to cover up her financial crimes. Arthur Vance looked at the forged transfer deed resting on the table, then looked at the DNA results. The greasy, confident demeanor he had walked in with completely evaporated. He was a bottom-feeding attorney, but he was not stupid enough to risk disbarment and a federal prison sentence. I was provided with fraudulent documentation, Vance announced loudly, immediately backing away from the table and raising his hands in surrender. I was told the paternity claim was absolute and that the original will was legally binding. I had absolutely no knowledge of this extortion plot or the forged nature of the documents presented to the court. He lunged for his battered leather briefcase, violently snapping the brass latches shut. Ms. Brittany Vance declared, his voice rising in high-pitched panic, "I am formally severing our attorney-client relationship, effective immediately. Do not contact my office again." He turned on his heel, unlocked the front door with frantic speed, and practically sprinted down the driveway toward his luxury SUV. He had completely abandoned her to the wolves. My parents were completely paralyzed. Thomas looked at Brittany, his face morphing from confusion into absolute horrified disgust. The golden child, the perfect daughter they had weaponized against me my entire life, was standing before them as a confirmed adulterer, an extortionist, and a felony fraudster. They had literally gone to jail for her. They had destroyed their own pristine reputation, screaming in the lobby of my corporate headquarters like unhinged lunatics, all to protect a woman who was actively manipulating them to pay off her secret debts. Diane let out a weak, pathetic gasp, covering her mouth with both hands. "You lied to us," my mother whispered, tears of genuine shock finally spilling down her heavily made-up cheeks. "You made us attack your sister. You made us defame Liam's memory in front of everyone. How could you do this to your own family?" Terrence did not let Brittany answer. He stepped right into her personal space, forcing her to look him directly in the eye. "I am filing for immediate divorce on Monday morning," Terrence said, delivering the final fatal blow to her fabricated existence. "Because my name is the only father listed on the birth certificate, I am filing for full, undisputed custody of Leo. You are completely bankrupt, you have zero assets, and you are about to face multiple felony charges for wire fraud and extortion. No judge in this state will ever grant you access to that child. You are going to leave this house right now, and you are never going to speak to me or my son again." The absolute finality of his words broke whatever was left of her composure. Brittany collapsed to her knees on the hardwood floor, a loud, agonizing wail tearing through her throat. The fake influencer empire, the stolen money, the safety of her marriage, it was all completely gone, burned to ash in a matter of minutes. I stood perfectly still, watching the destruction unfold, feeling the profound protective warmth of Liam's memory settling peacefully over the house once more. The war was officially over. I stepped back from the mahogany dining table, leaving the silver fountain pen completely untouched beside the fraudulent transfer deed. Instead of signing my life away, I walked calmly over to the kitchen island, picked up my mug of black coffee, and took a slow, deliberate sip. The liquid had gone entirely cold, but the bitter taste grounded me. I pulled out one of the high-back bar stools and simply sat down, crossing my legs and resting my hands in my lap. I was not going to interrupt them. I was going to let them talk. I was going to let them dig their graves so incredibly deep that they would never see the light of day again. My mother Diane scoffed at my silence. She completely misinterpreted my physical distance as the final stage of total surrender. She turned her attention away from me and began pacing the length of the living room, actively discussing the liquidation of my assets as if I were already a ghost. "We need to contact that private estate liquidator in Bellevue," my mother instructed my father, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. We cannot wait for a traditional real estate agent to stage the property. The market is too volatile and Brittany needs this capital immediately. If we sell the house to a corporate buyer for cash, we can bypass the standard closing delays. We might take a slight hit on the total valuation, but we will have the money in her trust account by next Friday. My father Thomas nodded in fervent agreement, his eyes gleaming with sheer greed. He was already doing the illegal math in his head. We will route the initial payout through the new LLC Arthur set up, my father explained, gesturing toward the sleazy attorney. That will completely shield the transaction from any state tax audits. Once the cash is secured, we pay off the $150,000 in credit card debt immediately. Brittany can finally stop panicking, and the creditors will disappear. It is the perfect clean break. I took another sip of my cold coffee, my eyes tracking my sister. Brittany was leaning casually against the stone fireplace, examining her perfectly manicured nails. She looked absolutely radiant, utterly convinced of her own sociopathic brilliance. "And what about Terrence?" I asked, my voice cutting softly through their rapid-fire financial planning. "Does your husband know you are standing in my living room, stealing $1 million to pay off your secret debts?" Brittany let out a sharp, condescending laugh that chilled me to the bone. "Terrence has absolutely no idea where I am," she smirked, tossing her hair over her shoulder. "He thinks I am at a private grief counseling session this morning. He is such a simple, predictable man, Gemma. As long as I keep cooking his dinners, smiling for his camera, and playing the devoted mother to his son, he will keep working his exhausting 60-hour weeks to pay our mortgage. He is completely clueless. I am going to walk out of here today with my debt entirely erased, and he will literally never know a single thing about it." Arthur Vance, the predatory lawyer, checked his gold Rolex watch and cleared his throat loudly. He was growing impatient, completely oblivious to the fact that his clients had just verbally confessed to a coordinated conspiracy to commit wire fraud and grand larceny in front of a witness. "This family strategizing is all well and good," Vance interrupted, tapping the stark black signature line of the legal document with his index finger. "But this entire financial plan relies completely on this piece of paper being executed. The probate judge has already signed the preliminary review based on the paternity claim. Once your sister signs this deed, the property is legally transferred into the minor child's trust, and I can initiate the immediate sale. So if we could please conclude this business, I have a golf tea time at 1 o'clock. Brittany pushed herself off the stone fireplace and marched directly up to the kitchen island, standing just inches away from where I sat. The smug, victorious aura radiating off her was physically nauseating. She slammed her hand flat against the marble countertop, her eyes flashing with pure venom. "Enough stalling," Gemma Brittany demanded, her voice rising to a shrill, commanding pitch. "You have lost. There is no one coming to save you. Liam is in the ground, your career is hanging by a thread, and you have absolutely zero legal standing to fight this. Pick up the pen, sign the transfer deed, and get out of my house. We are done playing games." Right on cue, a loud, heavy click echoed through the quiet foyer. I had intentionally left the front door unlocked. The heavy wooden double doors forcefully swung inward, hitting the interior walls with a massive echoing crash that instantly silenced the entire room. The invaders all whipped their heads toward the entryway. Arthur Vance physically jumped, reaching instinctively for his battered leather briefcase. My mother gasped, clutching her designer handbag against her chest. Striding through the threshold with the lethal grace of an apex predator was Veronica. She was wearing a razor-sharp charcoal suit, her heels clicking aggressively against the hardwood floor. She did not look like a woman walking into a negotiation. She looked like an executioner walking up to a guillotine. But it was the man walking closely behind her that caused the atmosphere in the room to violently and permanently shift. Terrence stepped into the natural light of the living room. The transformation in his physical presence was absolutely terrifying. He was no longer the exhausted, broken husband desperately searching for answers. He was standing perfectly straight, his shoulders squared, practically vibrating with a raw, uncontainable energy. His eyes were completely hollowed out, devoid of any warmth or affection, burning instead with a cold, devastating rage. His jaw was clenched so tightly that the muscles in his neck strained against his collar. In his right hand, Terrence tightly gripped a thick manila folder. The air in the room instantly evaporated. The triumphant, arrogant energy that had fueled my family for the last 20 minutes was completely sucked out of the space, replaced by a suffocating, paralyzing dread. Brittany took a staggered step backward, her jaw dropping open as the color rapidly drained from her face. She looked at her husband, then looked at the manila folder in his hand, and the horrifying realization finally dawned on her. The game was not over. The true nightmare had just begun. Arthur Vance was entirely oblivious to the monumental personal catastrophe unfolding in front of him. To the sleazy bottom-feeding attorney, Terrence and Veronica were merely unwanted interruptions delaying his inevitable payday. He tightened his grip on his battered leather briefcase and stepped aggressively toward the mahogany dining table, attempting to reassert his crumbling authority over the room. "Listen here," Vance barked, his voice laced with forced bravado as he aggressively tapped a blunt index finger against the signature line of the transfer deed. "I do not care who you people are or why you are barging into a private, highly sensitive family meeting. We have a probate judge's preliminary order, and we are executing a legally binding transfer of assets." "Madam," he sneered, pointing the finger directly at me, "pick up that silver pen and sign this document immediately, or I will have the court hold you in contempt by the end of the business day." The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of his threat hung in the dead air of the living room for precisely 2 seconds. Then the silence was shattered by a sound that completely unnerved my parents. Veronica laughed. It was not a polite chuckle. It was a loud, booming, entirely unrestrained laugh that echoed sharply off the vaulted ceilings. It was the laugh of an apex predator watching a mouse intentionally lock itself inside a steel cage. She walked slowly past Terrence, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor with terrifying precision, and stopped directly across the table from Arthur Vance. "Hold her in contempt of court," Veronica repeated, still chuckling as she shook her head in sheer disbelief at the man's incompetence. "You are threatening to hold my client in contempt for refusing to sign over a piece of property. That is a fascinating legal strategy, Mr. Vance. It truly is. But it completely ignores one massive catastrophic flaw in your entire case." Vance puffed out his chest, his face flushing red with indignation. "The will is fully notarized and filed," he sputtered, his voice rising in defensive anger. "The paternity claim has been submitted to the probate judge. The asset transfer is completely lawful." Veronica stopped smiling. Her expression instantly hardened into a mask of pure, lethal professionalism. She reached into the pristine manila folder she carried under her arm and pulled out a thick, legally bound document stamped with the official seal of the State Records Office. She did not hand it to him. She slammed it down onto the mahogany table, right on top of the fraudulent transfer deed, the heavy thud causing my mother to physically flinch. "That is a certified property abstract," Veronica announced, her voice ringing out with absolute, undeniable authority. "It details the complete financial and ownership history of this estate. I highly suggest you read the primary title holder section before you threaten my client with another word." Vance stared at the heavy document. He slowly reached out, his confidence visibly faltering, and flipped open the heavy cover. His eyes scanned down the first page, tracking the dense legal text. Brittany pushed past her father, her panic temporarily overridden by her desperate greed. "What does it say?" she demanded, her voice shrill and trembling. "It does not matter what her lawyer says, Arthur. Liam owned this house. He was the sole provider. Tell her to sign the deed." Vance did not answer her. His eyes remained locked on the certified abstract. The red flush of anger that had painted his face only moments ago was rapidly vanishing, replaced by a sickening, translucent pallor. His hands began to shake slightly, rattling the thick paper against the smooth wood of the table. "You filed a fraudulent claim against a $986,000 estate," Veronica stated, twisting the legal knife deep into his ribs. "You drafted an emergency injunction and presented it to a probate judge, demanding the immediate transfer of an asset that supposedly belonged to the deceased. But if you had bothered to do even 5 minutes of actual legal due diligence, instead of blindly trusting the lies of a desperate drowning woman, you would have discovered the fatal error in your extortion plot." Veronica leaned forward, planting her hands flat on the table, forcing Vance to look her directly in the eyes. This house has never been in Liam's name. She declared, her words falling like massive crushing stones upon my family. He never owned a single square foot of this property. He possessed absolutely zero legal equity in it. He did not buy it, he did not finance it, and he certainly did not have the legal authority to leave it to an illegitimate child in a forged will. My father, Thomas, let out a choked gasp of disbelief. "That is impossible," he stammered, pointing a shaking finger at me. Liam was a highly successful software engineer. He made 3 times what she makes. He bought this house for her when they got married. "Wrong again, Thomas," I said softly, remaining perfectly seated on my kitchen bar stool. "I bought this house." Veronica nodded sharply, gesturing to the certified abstract. "My client purchased this entire estate exactly 14 months prior to her marriage to Liam," she explained, systematically dismantling their entire narrative. "And she did not purchase it as an individual. She purchased it through a privately held limited liability company. An LLC that she solely owns, solely manages, and solely funded with her own private investment capital. Liam's name is not on the deed. His name is not on the mortgage. He was, legally speaking, nothing more than a permanent tenant residing in a property owned by my client's corporation." The living room plunged into a horrifying absolute silence. My mother stared at me with wide, uncomprehending eyes, her brain entirely short-circuiting as her massive payout vanished into thin air. Brittany looked like she was going to be physically sick. The foundation of her entire master plan, the guaranteed $1 million safety net she had constructed her entire fraudulent reality upon, had just been completely vaporized. She had risked a massive federal prison sentence to forge a will demanding an asset that simply did not exist. But the most profound reaction came from Arthur Vance. The sleazy attorney looked like he had just been electrocuted. He dropped the certified abstract as if the paper itself were burning his skin. He took a rapid, terrified step backward from the mahogany table, bumping heavily into my father. He fully understood the massive legal catastrophe he had just orchestrated. "You submitted a forged will to a sitting judge demanding the seizure of a corporate asset." Veronica continued, her voice practically dripping with ruthless satisfaction. "You filed a sworn affidavit claiming ownership of a property without ever checking the county title records. That is not just gross malpractice, Mr. Vance. That is active participation in a criminal conspiracy to commit wire fraud and grand larceny. When I hand this complete file over to the State Bar Association on Monday morning, they will not just disbar you. The federal prosecutor is going to put you in a concrete cell." Vance began to hyperventilate. His chest heaved as he stared at the forged transfer deed he had personally drafted, the document that was going to secure his massive contingency fee. It was now a signed, documented confession of his own profound criminality. He slowly turned his head to look at Brittany, his eyes wide with absolute terrifying realization. He had allowed this toxic, desperate woman to drag him straight into a lethal legal meat grinder, and there was absolutely no escape. Brittany frantically shook her head, unable to process the destruction of her reality. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of Vance's heavy breathing. "No, that is a lie. Liam paid for the renovations. He paid for the custom stonework. He told me he owned it. He told me he would take care of us." "He lied to you," I replied, my voice completely devoid of any sympathy. "Just like you lied to Terrence. He wanted to project the image of a wealthy, successful provider to his naive little mistress, so he claimed my success as his own. And you were greedy enough and stupid enough to believe him without verifying a single fact. You built your entire extortion plot on the bragging rights of a dead liar." Vance lunged for his leather briefcase. He did not bother to pack his expensive fountain pen or the fraudulent paperwork. He violently snapped the briefcase shut, his hands shaking so severely he could barely grip the handle. He had walked into my home believing he was the smartest, most dangerous man in the room. Now he was a terrified animal caught directly in the headlights of an oncoming freight train, and the train was being driven by Veronica. The complete dismantling of the real estate scheme was an absolute flawless victory, but the destruction was only just beginning. Because while Veronica had just destroyed their financial future, Terrence was standing right behind her, holding the manila folder that was going to systematically destroy their entire personal lives. Arthur Vance was completely paralyzed, his hand welded to his battered leather briefcase, entirely trapped by the gravity of his own profound professional negligence. But my mother Diane was fundamentally incapable of accepting defeat. Her brain hardwired for a lifetime of stubborn entitlement and emotional manipulation simply refused to process the absolute legal reality Veronica had just delivered. "It does not matter," Diane suddenly shrieked, her voice echoing wildly off the high vaulted ceilings. She stepped forward, her face flushed with a desperate, ugly red. "LLC or no LLC, corporate technicalities do not change the ultimate truth, Gemma. You still have a profound moral obligation to this family. You are sitting on a massive mountain of wealth while Liam's own flesh and blood is going to starve. Brittany is raising your dead husband's biological child. You owe her. You owe that baby a future. You cannot just abandon your own nephew." I placed my cold cup of coffee down on the marble countertop of the kitchen island. The sharp clink of ceramic against stone instantly silenced my mother's unhinged rant. I slid off the high-back bar stool and stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my dark trousers. I did not raise my voice. I did not yell. I let my tone drop into a cold, lethal calm that completely froze the air in my lungs. I walked past my mother, entirely ignoring her existence, and approached Terrence. He looked at me, his eyes burning with that righteous, devastating fury, and extended his arm. He handed me the thick manila folder he had carried into the room. It was the final lethal weapon I had personally asked him to retrieve from my private home safe this morning. I turned my back to Terrence and walked slowly toward the mahogany dining table. Brittany watched my every step, her breath hitching in her throat, her eyes darting frantically to the heavy folder. I reached the table, raised the thick envelope high in the air, and slammed it down directly beside the forged transfer deed and the certified property abstract. The impact sounded exactly like a gunshot in the silent room. It was a heavily sealed, highly confidential medical dossier. Across the top left corner, stamped in stark, clinical blue ink, was the official crest of Massachusetts General Hospital. "Flesh and blood," I repeated softly, letting the words hang in the air like a poisonous fog. "You have spent the entire week screaming about Liam's flesh and blood. You dragged my name through the mud at a funeral, you staged a pathetic, humiliating protest in the lobby of my corporate headquarters, and you forged a legal document to steal my home, all under the absolute certainty that your child was a product of Liam's genetics." I locked my eyes directly onto Brittany. She was trembling violently now, her manicured hands gripping the edge of the stone fireplace, as if the floor beneath her was actively crumbling. "When Liam was 20 years old, long before I ever met him, long before he became a highly successful software engineer, he was a terrified college student fighting for his life." I explained, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. "He was diagnosed with aggressive stage 3 testicular cancer. The oncology team at Massachusetts General had to act immediately to save him. He underwent multiple highly invasive surgeries, followed by brutal, prolonged rounds of severe targeted radiation therapy." My father let out a quiet, horrifying gasp. The color entirely drained from his face as the inevitable catastrophic conclusion formed in his mind. But I did not let him speak. I pushed the sealed medical file directly across the table toward Brittany. "He survived the cancer." I continued, every single word acting as a heavy hammer striking the final nails into her coffin. "But the life-saving treatment came with a permanent, devastating cost. The radiation completely destroyed his reproductive system. I have the signed, notarized medical evaluations from 3 separate board-certified endocrinologists inside that folder. He had a 0 sperm count. He was 100% permanently and irreversibly sterile." Brittany let out a choked, wet noise, clapping her hands over her mouth, as if she could physically stop the words from penetrating her ears. "Liam could not give you a child, Brittany," I said, leaning over the table, bringing my face just inches away from hers. "He could not give anyone a child. He was physically incapable of fathering a baby. We knew this from the very first year of our marriage. We had completely accepted it. We were quietly planning to adopt. I stood up straight, looking down at the absolute wreckage of my sister. She was a hollowed-out shell of the arrogant, victorious woman who had walked through my front door just 20 minutes ago. You just committed felony fraud to steal from a widow using a dead man who couldn't have children. Arthur Vance let out a sound that was half whimper, half gasp. He stared at the Massachusetts General logo as if it were a venomous snake. The DNA test. Terrence had slammed down earlier, had proven Terrence was not the father. But this new medical file proved something infinitely more dangerous. It proved that Liam could not possibly be the father either. The entire legal foundation of the emergency injunction was not just a mistake, it was a biological impossibility. You lied. My father whispered, his voice cracking with an unfamiliar, profound grief. He looked at Brittany, his eyes wide with absolute betrayal. You told us he was the father. You swore to us. You made us believe we had a piece of Liam left. You weaponized our love for our family just to pay off your massive credit card debts. Diane was completely frozen. The unhinged moral superiority she had weaponized just minutes earlier had entirely evaporated. She looked at the sealed medical file, then at me, and finally at her golden child. The illusion of the perfect, flawless daughter was completely shattered, replaced by the horrifying reality of a calculated sociopathic criminal. Brittany slowly shook her head, her eyes wide and manic. No, she rasped, her voice completely broken. He never told me. He never said he was sterile. We slept together. He promised me. He promised he would take care of us. Because he was a liar. Terrence finally spoke, his voice rumbling through the room with devastating authority. He stepped up beside me, glaring down at his wife. He wanted to play the powerful, wealthy provider for a naive, greedy girl. He knew he could not get you pregnant. So when you suddenly showed up claiming you were carrying his baby, he immediately knew you were sleeping with someone else. That is exactly why he cut off your secret corporate credit card. That is why he suddenly withdrew his financial support. He knew you were running a con on him, just like you were running a con on me. Brittany sank entirely to the floor, her bright red designer dress pooling around her on the hardwood like spilled blood. She covered her face with her hands, letting out a series of ragged, uncontrollable sobs. The meticulously constructed house of cards had not just collapsed, it had completely incinerated. She had no money, no leverage, and absolutely no defense. The ragged, uncontrollable sobs echoing from the floorboards did absolutely nothing to soften the hardened, furious angles of Terrence's face. He looked down at the woman he had loved, the woman he had exhausted himself to provide for, and felt nothing but profound, icy disgust. Before Brittany could even attempt to lift her head, before her panicked brain could formulate another pathetic lie or manipulate another tear, Terrence reached across the mahogany table. He snatched up the certified DNA paternity results, stepping directly over the spilled edge of her bright red designer dress. He did not hand the papers to her. He threw them directly at her chest. The heavy packet struck her collarbone with a sharp slap before bursting open, sending crisp white pages fluttering down to settle around her knees like a mocking layer of snow. Brittany flinched violently, her tear-streaked face staring down at the stark, undeniable mathematical proof of her infidelity. Read it carefully. Terrence commanded, his voice devoid of a single ounce of mercy. Because that is the last piece of paper you will ever receive from me that does not come from a courthouse. I filed the absolute most brutal divorce petition this state allows at exactly 9 o'clock yesterday morning. Brittany gasped, her hands clawing desperately at the scattered documents. Terrence, please, she begged, her voice a wet, pathetic croak. You are his father. You love him. I do love him. Terrence fired back instantly, cutting off her manipulation at the root. I love him enough to ensure you never poison his mind or drag him into your chaotic criminal existence ever again. I am suing you for marital fraud. I am suing you for the severe emotional distress and profound financial damages of tricking me into raising another man's child. And because your name is about to be heavily associated with a massive federal indictment, I have already petitioned the family court for full undisputed custody. You are completely toxic. You are a danger to that boy. I will raise him, I will protect him, and I will make absolutely certain he never learns what a monster his biological mother truly is." Brittany collapsed forward, her forehead practically resting against the hardwood floor, a high-pitched wail of absolute despair ripping from her throat. She had lost her husband, her home, and her child in a span of 5 minutes, but her shattered mind still clung to a single microscopic thread of hope. She still believed she could run back to Bradley. She believed that if she threatened to expose his affair to his billionaire father-in-law, he would be forced to hire her an expensive defense attorney and bail her out of this nightmare. I saw the desperate calculation flashing behind her tear-soaked eyes, and I decided it was time to drive the final nail completely through the coffin. If you are sitting there wondering how quickly you can get Bradley on the phone to extort him for legal fees, I would highly advise against it, I said, leaning back against the marble kitchen island. Brittany froze, her breath hitching in her chest. She slowly looked up at me, her face a mask of pure terror. When Veronica subpoenaed Bradley last night and secured his full confession, we acquired copies of all the corporate credit card statements he used to fund your fake influencer lifestyle. I explained, my voice smooth and lethal. We acquired the hotel receipts, the text messages, and his sworn admission of the affair. I knew you would try to use him as a desperate safety net, so I eliminated the net. I took a slow, highly deliberate sip of my cold coffee before delivering the ultimate killing blow. At 8 o'clock this morning, I hired a private courier service. I stated clearly. They delivered a highly secure, beautifully bound dossier directly to the private residential estate of Bradley's billionaire father-in-law. The package was addressed directly to Bradley's wife. It contained every single piece of evidence, including the DNA results, proving he fathered a child with his former subordinate. As we speak, Bradley is currently being violently evicted from his own mansion and aggressively fired from his executive position. He has no money, he has no power, and his corporate legal team is preparing to destroy him. Your secret sugar daddy is completely gone, Brittany. You destroyed his life just as thoroughly as you tried to destroy mine. A horrifying, suffocating silence descended upon the living room. My parents, Thomas and Diane, finally broke under the immense, crushing weight of the absolute destruction. Diane clutched her chest, her carefully manicured fingers digging into her pearl-white pantsuit as she began to heavily hyperventilate. She staggered backward, her perfectly maintained facade of wealthy superiority completely shattering as she gasped for air. Thomas rushed to support her, leaning his own trembling weight against the hallway wall. Their golden child, the perfect daughter they had worshipped and weaponized against me, was completely annihilated. There was no money. There was no prestige. There was only a massive impending criminal scandal that would permanently ruin their family name and likely send them back to a holding cell as willing co-conspirators. Oh my God! My mother wheezed, her eyes rolling back slightly as panic seized her chest. We are ruined. Thomas, we are completely ruined. And as if the universe itself had decided to provide the perfect cinematic punctuation to my mother's terrifying realization, the atmosphere inside the living room violently shifted one final time. The bright, blinding morning sunlight spilling through the massive front windows was suddenly cut by a violent, rapidly alternating flash of brilliant red and blue. The intense strobing lights painted the walls of my foyer, casting long, chaotic shadows across the hardwood floor. A split second later, the deafening wail of multiple police sirens abruptly cut off, replaced by the heavy, authoritative slamming of car doors in my driveway. Brittany scrambled backward across the floor like a terrified animal, hitting the base of the stone fireplace and pulling her knees tightly to her chest. Her eyes were completely wide, unblinking, reflecting the relentless red and blue flashes of the police cruisers. Veronica stepped forward from the mahogany dining table, calmly adjusting the cuffs of her razor-sharp charcoal suit. She picked up the forged transfer deed, the certified property abstract, and the medical file, neatly sliding them back into her pristine manila folder. Arthur Vance thought he could simply walk out of here and avoid the fallout, Veronica announced, her voice ringing out with absolute terrifying authority over the commotion outside. But you cannot simply withdraw from a federal crime after the fraudulent documents have been presented to a sitting judge. When I discovered the massive depth of this extortion plot yesterday evening, I did not just prepare a civil defense. Heavy, aggressive knocks pounded against the thick wood of my front double doors. The sound reverberated through the house, a harbinger of absolute justice. I handed the entire digital extortion file, the forged will, and the complete paper trail of the wire fraud conspiracy directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the local precinct commander Veronica concluded, offering Brittany one final devastating smile. The trap is officially closed. I walked over to the front door, feeling the heavy, beautiful weight of Liam's memory guiding my hand, and turned the brass lock to welcome the police inside. The dramatic conclusion of this narrative offers a striking reflection on the fragility of deceit and the unyielding power of truth. At the core of the conflict lies a profound lesson: an empire constructed entirely upon lies, no matter how meticulously orchestrated or arrogantly defended, is inherently unstable and destined to fall. Brittany's spectacular downfall was not merely the result of a single tactical error, but the inevitable collapse of a fraudulent foundation. She weaponized greed, manipulated emotions, and leveraged false confidence to steal a legacy she never earned. However, her extreme arrogance blinded her to a fundamental reality: deceit requires constant, exhausting maintenance, while the truth simply exists. By choosing to build her extortion plot on shallow assumptions and unverified claims, she essentially trapped herself. Conversely, Gemma's decisive victory perfectly demonstrates the formidable strength of patience, precision, and undeniable facts. Instead of reacting with immediate chaotic emotion, she firmly anchored herself in reality. She gathered irrefutable evidence, ranging from private corporate structures to indisputable medical records, and allowed the perpetrators to dig their own graves with their blind entitlement. The silence of absolute truth will always deafen the loudest lies when the final reckoning arrives. This story serves as a stark, unforgettable reminder that ethical shortcuts, malicious extortion, and manipulative schemes inevitably lead to complete ruin. True power does not stem from the ability to aggressively deceive others, but rather from the quiet integrity of standing firmly in the light of undeniable facts, shielded by meticulous preparation and unwavering honesty. We must recognize that shortcuts always exact a heavy toll. When faced with adversity, emotional manipulation will always shatter against objective reality. Always choose to anchor your life in radical truth and uncompromising integrity so that your foundation remains unshakable when storms inevitably arrive at your own front door.